All the people for the supervisor.
Recording in progress.
It's showing 6 on mine. 6. I'm on the city Wi-Fi. Are you ready? Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the San Rafael City Council meeting. Today's actually Tuesday, February 18th, as we observed the President's holiday yesterday. I'll request the city clerk to call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Present.
Councilmember Hill.
Present.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Present.
Councilmember Yeden
Present.
Mayor Kate.
Present. All 5 of us are here this evening. So welcome, everyone, whether you're here in person in the chambers or watching online. We are so glad to have you. We always like to start our meetings with deep appreciation for our dedicated city staff whose hard work keeps our community going every single day. Appreciate all the work that has been done through the recent storms. We came through very well, so thank you for all of your work. I know there's also a lot of uncertainty out there about how recent federal directives may impact our city, and many have asked us what lies ahead. Well, while we can't predict the future, I want to assure you that we are actively working with our funding partners and local agencies to continue to deliver the services to our community that we all depend on. So I encourage you to sign up for the city newsletter, the Snapshot, if you don't already, as it's a great way to receive updates throughout the year. Before we get to our business agenda, we include a land acknowledgement in addition to the work that we do every single day, all the time with the tribe on an ongoing basis. We thank the original caretakers of this land. San Rafael is traditionally home to the Coast Miwok people, many of whom today are tribal citizens of the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria. And we honor their continuing involvement in stewardship practices that benefit us all. Glad you're here. I will turn to the city clerk, who can describe how people can participate in tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and streamed live to YouTube. For members of the public wishing to provide public comment, displayed on the podium and the projector is a timer to help you stay within your 2-minute time frame. You're invited, though not required, to introduce yourself and say what part of Center Fel you live in, or if you're from outside of Center Fel. We do offer closed captioning for this meeting on Zoom. You can select the live transcript button on Zoom to enable this feature. For community members may request reasonable accommodations to provide public comments virtually. For more information about that, or if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can email me at city.clerk@cityofcenterfel.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to the city manager, Lilovich, for her report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and the community. I wanted to highlight that we have a Police Accountability Advisory Committee tomorrow night, February 19th, here in the council chambers. It will also be via Zoom, the presentation, but participation here in the council chambers in person. The topic tomorrow night is Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the San Rafael Police Department. The presentation will clarify the role of local law enforcement versus that of federal immigration authorities. This meeting will be held in English with Spanish interpretation. The presentation will be recorded and available on the city's website after the meeting if you can't make it. cityofsanrafael.org/PAC, PAAC-meetings is where you can find that information. I thought it was important to note for the community that one of the things that will be covered there at a high level is that as a matter of both policy and practice, the San Rafael Police Department does not engage in immigration enforcement activities. Under the current federal law, this means that the police department does not collaborate with federal immigration officials in investigations, interrogations, detentions, or arrests related to immigration status. They do not conduct immigration enforcement actions, and they do not share information regarding immigration status with federal agencies unless required by law. We have a couple other community meetings this week. 2nd and 4th Street Intersection Improvement Community Meeting is happening February 27th at 6 p.m. It's an opportunity to learn more about the project and talk to city staff. It'll be at City Hall, also available to watch via Zoom. The website for that is cityofsanrafael.org/2nd and 4th Street Intersection-improvements. I also wanted to mention there were some meetings last wire, some important meetings about wildfire and lessons learned from Southern California. We had a panel of pretty amazing people from the city of San Rafael, including Mayor Kate, Fire Chief Abe Broman, Deputy Director Quinn Gardner, and Fire Safe Marin was also involved. They're working on editing the videos that were taken for those events. And we'll put some information up on the website where you can find those YouTube videos. There's a lot of great information about how do we manage and continue the great work at reducing wildfire risks. A couple more events. There's a new free art exhibit at the new Marin Museum of Contemporary Art, which is relocated to downtown San Rafael at 1210 Fifth Avenue. That runs from, I guess it started last month in January and it runs through March the 30th. The exhibit is called Cluttered Heads by artists Reniel Del Rosario and Richard Shaw. It's open Wednesday to Friday, 11 to 4, and Saturday to Sunday from 11 to 5. We're also celebrating Black History Month, and there's an event on Saturday, the 22nd at 11 a.m. at the 4th Street Downtown Library pop-up. It's called Black Labor Pioneers in Marin County, and it's with historian John William Templeton. Last but not least, and I'm seeing our friend Salama in the audience. She'll appreciate that we're talking about our age-friendly community partnership, which is Sunday, March the 2nd. There's a fun event to celebrate community members aged 90 and over at the community center at 618 B Street. There'll be food, music, and dancing. They're asking for an RSVP by the 26th. To call 415-485-3333 if you're interested in attending.
Thank you. I'll turn to my colleagues to share what they were up to the last 2 weeks. I'll start with the Vice Mayor Bushy.
Thank you. I attended the annual meeting of the Black Canyon Dominican Valley HOA. It was held jointly with Dominican University on their premises. And it was just lovely to be in those old buildings again. I also attended a board meeting of the Central Marin Sanitation Agency. It was an important one because we were celebrating the California Water Environment Association's Redwood Empire section awarding CMSA their 2024 Engineering Achievement Award of the Year. This was for the agency's renewable power delivery program. This is often referred to as our food to energy program. It's in collaboration with Marin Sanitary. We collect food, put it in, add it to the digesters at the wastewater treatment plant and make more energy. 2024 was the first year when the facility became energy positive. That is, they were generating power, renewable power here in Marin for our consumption. So a big achievement, and they've been awarded this program award for their engineering and how they designed the program and how they have continually improved it. So super proud of that. CMSA and their energy program is only the second wastewater treatment plant in California to add energy generation to their mix. So a big achievement, something we should be very proud of in Marin, where this is a real environmental impact program that is happening using literally our waste to keep the lights on and keep the pumps running at CMSA. So big achievement. Our congratulations to CMSA for this engineering award. And that's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz.
Thank you. I attended the Marin Wildfire Exec meeting, and also just to note that the board meeting will be on Thursday from 3 to 5, and those meetings are they're broadcast live, and then the recordings are available on the site. We have been starting to get some questions about what's happening there, and this is really at an important time of the year because we're doing the work plan reviews, and the departments are looking at the different projects, and this year especially, there's a lot of attention on that. Attended the wildfire safety meeting that was here. Thank you, Mayor Kate, for hosting that. The Seeds of Hope, thanks to Lynn Murphy and the police department and all the service providers. This has been going on for a long time, and each time it gets better and better in terms of what happens there with serving the homeless community and just the collaboration. And it's amazing the difference hangers make in distributing clothes. So that was really good. Attended the Homeless Policy Steering Committee meeting, and there was a lot of discussion about what's happening in other jurisdictions in terms of their, Novato and Fairfax have made decisions that don't quite fit Santa Fe's mindset. And so there was quite a bit of discussion with the service providers around what's happening there. And then the Housing and Homeless Subcommittee, we had a good update on what's happening with Mahone Path encampment, as well as other activities happening within San Rafael. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. I have 3 meetings to report on Wednesday, January 22nd. I'm going back to January because I did not attend last meeting. Attended the Finance Subcommittee meeting with Mayor Kate, led by Director Navazio. We got a preview of the voter-approved Tax Oversight Committee annual report, as well as the mid-year budget, which we are considering this evening. On Wednesday, January 29th, at the Marin County Council of Mayors and Council Members, we received a presentation and Q&A with Director Stephen Torrance of Emergency Management with Marin County, as well as Jason Weber, Marin County Fire Chief, and Mark Brown, Executive Officer of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. They were able to provide very concrete examples of what we're doing as a county and region with respect to wildfire. Obviously, the devastation in Los Angeles is prompting the right kinds of discussions. What have we been doing? Where are we now and where are we going? So they really provided, I think, a really strong view of that, and I think complementary to the meeting that we had here. I think every member of San Rafael City Council attended that meeting. And then on Tuesday, February 4th, Mayor Kate and myself, as well as Captain Morleon and SRFD Deputy Director Quinn Gardner and Community Services Division Director Daniel Cooperman gave a presentation to the Gerstle Park Neighborhood Association on a range of topics, as well as Q&A. And that was fun over here at the Elks Club a couple weeks ago. And that's my report.
Thank you. Councilmember Lorenz Gulati.
Thank you, Mayor. We met, Mayor Kate and I met with Board Supervisor Dennis Rodoni on our quarterly meeting just to connect between county and city. I also attended the first meeting of the year for the Eastern Rafael Working Group, and it's sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, and that includes all the businesses in Eastern Rafael. And the topic of conversation was parking permits, so it was a nice presentation by Dixon, and we had staff from the city as well. So it was great to hear the study that we are doing and hearing from the merchants as well. Also, I attended several meetings regarding parking permits. And I guess my highlight is that this year I'm part of the UC Marine Master Gardeners, and our class was last Thursday at the Falkirk Center, and I was very impressed with the collaboration that Marine Master Gardeners have with the city to be able to maintain the beautiful gardens there. And it's open to the public, so everybody is invited. Thank you.
Thank you. 3 meetings that I'll report out on. The Transportation Authority of Marin, also known as TAM. I'm one of their executive committees, and we had a meeting that was broadcast and also recorded talking about the potential impact of changes to federal funding on our local infrastructure projects. So TAM is the pass-through, as it were, for many projects that both benefit San Rafael as other communities. So again, as I said in my opening remarks, it's a wait and see, but we're looking at the projects that have been obligated and the money hasn't been awarded. So hopefully those will all come through as we have some projects that are dependent on that. So stay tuned. As Councilmember Kurtz already mentioned, we had a housing and homeless subcommittee meeting. We had folks from the public that came. That is a public participation meeting as well, and covered many, many topics, some of them that will be brought forward to the council in future meetings. And then finally, along with Supervisor Brian Colbert, who's a brand new supervisor to the Marin County Board of Supervisors, he and I presented at the Marin Coalition, which is a local business group that says, what's their tagline? Interesting conversations happen here. Hopefully they found ours interesting. Supervisor Colbert talked about his vision for the county, and I was able to fill in with the great things that we've been doing here in San Rafael with wildfire, sea level rise, community investments, and economic development. So as always, you can see that your council is busy off of the dais. I would invite any public comment on the reports that you just heard if you're so inclined. Now is the time to provide public comment on these reports. Not seeing anybody, I'll move to the consent agenda. Are there any items that my colleagues would like to hold? Looking to my right? No? Okay. Not seeing any items to be held, I do welcome public comment on the consent agenda. This is items 4A through 4D. If you'd like to comment on them. Okay, not seeing any public comment. I request a motion on this item, please.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy. Aye. Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Lorenz Gulati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Our first public hearing is change in speed limits on 24 San Rafael roadway segments. And I am so looking forward to this agenda item because, like my colleagues, we receive emails all the time about speeding. So we are looking forward to hearing more. And I see Director April Miller. She's pointing somewhere else. Assistant Director Joanna Kwok, welcome.
Sorry, give us a moment. We're loading up the presentation.
Yeah, no, take your time.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here tonight. Before I get started, I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our new city traffic engineer, Saeed Falkari. He's right there in the back.
Welcome.
Well, without further ado, we're going to jump right in. Tonight's presentation will be about the citywide engineering and traffic surveys and our strategy for applying AB 43 to reduce speed limits, and as it applies to our recommendation for changing speed limits on 24 roadway segments. We'll start off with a background on speed limits and Assembly Bill 43, along with our strategy on its application and recent downtown speed limits study, our ongoing engagement efforts and recommendations, along with other safety improvements we've done. Now I'm going to hand it over to our consultant from Parametrics, Jimmy Jessup, to jump into the technical.
Thank you, Joanna, and good evening, Honorable Mayor, Council members. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Parametrics has come alongside the city, and we're excited to have really had a chance to dive deep into looking at speed limits within the downtown area specifically. I do plan on giving a little bit of background on how speed limits are established as per the California Vehicle Code. There has been a momentous change in the ability of local jurisdictions to then further lower speed limits. That has come about as a result of Assembly Bill 41, brand new, and so we'll get a little bit of an understanding of Assembly Bill 43. And then we'll talk a little bit about what that means in our evaluation for San Rafael. So speed limits are a concept that we're all familiar with, and often many of us wonder, where did they come from? There's actually quite a strict prescription of how speed limits must be established as per the California Vehicle Code. Motorists also have an obligation to operate vehicles at speeds that are reasonable and prudent. And the guidance for how motorists understand the value of their speed that's reasonable and prudent must usually be advised by a posted speed limit. And the posted speed limits also provide a basis for adjudication of citations. Now, local governments have the responsibility of enacting speed limits, but only as pursuant to California Vehicle Code requirements. So in general, there's two types of speed limits. There are those that are presumed, even if there's not a posted speed limit sign. And maybe we can think of a residential street in a neighborhood. You won't always see a posted sign, but prima facie, that is presumed these roadways have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit as per the California Vehicle Code. Now, for all other roadways that are not either, say, a highway or in a local residence or business district, speed limits are to be set by an engineering and traffic survey. And the California Vehicle Code, the CVC, lays out exactly how engineering and traffic surveys are to be conducted and then how speed limits are to be recommended. So what I'll walk through first is what the CVC says, an engineering and traffic survey, how it's to be undertaken. What we do in the traffic engineering field is we go out and we measure free flow speeds, that is unimpeded speed, in the most favorable weather conditions, in the most favorable driving conditions that will not be affected by stop signs or other traffic. And we take speed surveys by radar typically and measure 100 vehicles worth of spot speed results. And we plot this out in a histogram that could look something like this. These are actually our speed survey results from Mission Avenue. And what you'll see is you can map the recorded free flow speeds of 100 vehicles. And when you take a look, you'll see some vehicles traveling on the high end, 34 miles an hour, some on the low end, 15 miles an hour. But in general, the eye can detect that the average vehicle is traveling about 23 miles an hour. So where do we go with thinking what is a reasonable and prudent speed for which these motorists should be traveling? That is, what speed should be advised through a speed limit? What the California Vehicle Code is based on, it's based on an engineering method that takes one standard deviation above the mean and tries to determine where's that limit where 85% of the vehicles are traveling at and below and 15% are traveling above. And historically, this is what we've thought as a reasonable and prudent level. In this case, the 85th percentile is 28 miles an hour. So that is 15 out of 100 vehicles are traveling higher than 28 miles an hour. And then what the California Vehicle Code suggests to do is to round to the nearest 5 miles an hour. And so for this roadway, it would have a recommended speed limit of 30 miles an hour. And as you can see, one way to think of this is that resultingly 6 vehicles would be recorded as speeding, that is over the recommended speed limit. But really, the bulk of vehicles are traveling substantially below what would be a recommended speed limit of 30 miles an hour. Now, historically, what has been documented tends to occur, and maybe we can also relate to this mindset, is you see a posted speed limit of 30 miles an hour, and you tend to maybe push that speed limit, and maybe 5 miles an hour is seen as normal. As more and more vehicles travel above the speed limit, the next time an engineering and traffic survey is conducted, the recommended speed limit tends to increase. And in California, the CVC requires speed limits to be established by an ENTS in our case, every 7 years. So on a 7-year cycle, we tend to see this phenomenon of speed creep or increasing speed limits. And this has happened in the past in San Rafael. So what this tends to lead to what we now have as a sense of traffic engineering is as speeds relate to safety, the faster a vehicle is traveling, upon impact, a pedestrian has less and less chance of survival. And this range between 20 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour is critical. If a vehicle is traveling 20 miles an hour, a pedestrian has a 90% chance of surviving that crash. But if a vehicle is traveling 40 miles an hour, that chance of survival drops to only 20%. And so in our example, that difference between, say, a 25 or a 30 mile an hour speed limit establishment really can mean the difference of how pedestrians are able to survive crashes. As mentioned, the CVC requires an ENTS to be updated every 7 years. And in San Rafael, the most updated ENTS was conducted for the most part in 2018. That means our city's speed surveys expire in October of this year. And so what the city did is they undertook an agreement with W-Trans to conduct citywide update of all the ENTS surveys for roadway segments across the city. This work also aligns nicely with California Assembly Bill 43, which, as I mentioned, is new legislation that, as of July of last year, allows local jurisdictions additional flexibility to reduce speed limits based on an engineering and traffic survey. So we at Parametrics have deep experience with applying AB 43 and so are coming together with the city and with the citywide ENTS results to further evaluate possibilities under the new provisions of AB 43 for additional speed limit reduction. I will talk just a little bit about AB 43 and what it means to cities. On the right is a graph that shows safety goals are not being met across the state. These are pedestrian fatality figures across the state of California. In the past 10 years, it's been recognized that pedestrian fatalities have increased. Part of this can be traced back to the speed creep phenomena that we talked about, how speed limits are set. And so there's been a general agreement that the 85th percentile engineering method is inadequate for local jurisdictions to achieve safety goals. Going back to 2018, there was a zero traffic fatalities task force that was convened, and the results of that 3-year study resulted in Assembly Bill 43. All of the provisions, as mentioned, of Assembly Bill 43 went effective summer of this past year. And what Assembly Bill 43 does is that it requires local jurisdictions for the first time to take into account the presence of vulnerable roadway users when establishing speed limits. Vulnerable roadway users are defined as children, seniors, persons with disabilities, and the unhoused. So as you remember, that example speed limit setting theoretical example did not take into account other aspects, mostly just the 85th percentile. And now Assembly Bill 43 requires other inputs to the equation. And then in setting speed limits, local jurisdictions are now able to reduce speed limits in certain areas where it's been determined on the basis of a study that there's a identified safety corridor, or if there are adjacent land uses that generate high numbers of pedestrians or bicyclists. There's also a specific provision for a new definition called a business activity district. And so really what AB 43 does for the first time is to bring speed limits just from an engineering realm and allow cities to then have additional impact on when it's appropriate for reducing speed limits. And this is just a snapshot of a number of news and pictures where AB 43 has been implemented so far throughout the Bay Area. Some of the provisions of AB 43 were available prior to this past summer, and so you'll see some of the larger cities were the first out of the gate to establish, say, largely business activity districts or downtown areas of 20 miles an hour. Smaller jurisdictions, you'll see Napa, Petaluma, Menlo Park have also now taken it upon themselves to utilize some of this legislation. And so when we started to think about how to implement this project for San Rafael, we looked at a few of the established and adopted plans and policies for the city. For instance, the city's bicycle and pedestrian master plan, the downtown precise plan, and last year's adopted local road safety plan. What we really started to come to a nexus on is that crash rates were exceedingly high in downtown. There's also special provisions in AB 43 that allow for evaluating business activity districts, as mentioned. And so what we plan to do is to undertake the study in 2 phases, looking at how AB 43 can influence speed limits in downtown. And that's what we're presenting on tonight. There's a future phase where we'll expand our sites citywide on all roadways, and then Joanna will have a chance to talk about what that looks like. Maybe to zoom in on the local road safety plan, you'll see citywide, the high collision network that was identified really centers on downtown. The high collision intersections identified across the city really center on downtown. And in fact, when we looked at the data, it was identified that unsafe speed is the leading cause of all crashes that result in injury and fatality in San Rafael. And so this really heightens our necessity of looking into speed management, that is, ways to reduce vehicle speeds. And actually, from the local road safety plan itself, one of the actions is to consider lowering speed limits in compliance with AB 43. So this work really lines up nicely with the availability of all AB 43 provisions. So what we did is we combined the work that had undertaken a citywide engineering and traffic survey of all the roadways throughout the city. And then we layered on top of that further speed surveys and further AB 43 evaluation for downtown specifically. As mentioned, a future phase is forthcoming. And what we'll talk about tonight is our results for downtown. Maybe just to ground ourselves, downtown is one of those areas where you won't see a posted speed limit sign on every road. And that harkens back to the CVC's prima facie or presumed speed limit of 25 miles an hour in business districts. So most of the speed limits in downtown are in existence 25 miles an hour. You'll see a picture here from Second where it is posted and stenciled. And really our investigation of AB 43 therefore comes down to what roadways would be appropriate for reduction of speed limit to 20 miles an hour. Right now, speed limits are already 25. We see the high collision network is centered on downtown. The mindset is based on speed surveys, crash history, local land use, specific context, and generating uses of vulnerable roadway users, seniors, children, individuals with disabilities, and the unhoused. And also based on current and future roadway projects, where do the provisions of AB 43 align with the ability of the city to determine if 20 miles an hour is an appropriate speed limit? So that was the work that we went into. We took a very in-depth evaluation. We also partnered in discussion with police and enforcement staff, with city staff, and excited to pass it over to Joanna, who's going to talk about what that outreach and the outcomes of this study look like.
Thanks, Jimmy. And as part of our engagement efforts, it's really started off as collaboration with our police department and, understanding that our current ENTS is about to expire this year. And as part of that collaboration, we started looking at applying AB 43 along with our new ENTS survey results. And we posted information about this on our website along with an online input form, which we launched back in October of last year, 2024. At the same time, we also presented our initial recommendations for the downtown speed limit reduction to BPAC, at which point we actually got some pretty good feedback from the community in wanting to expand further, like more streets in speed limit reduction. So we went back with our consultant at Parametrics and looked at conducting additional ENTS so that we can further evaluate which streets can be lowered in terms of speed limits, and brought the revised recommendation to the PAC and BPAC in January and February of this year. And we plan on continuing to outreach regarding this effort moving forward for future phases, as Jimmy had alluded to earlier. Here's a map of our recommended speed limit reductions in the downtown area. All the streets highlighted in orange and green are proposed to be reduced using methods combined based on application of AB 43, or simply just based on recommendations from our engineering and traffic survey, the ENTS. Speed limits on 2nd and 3rd are being maintained at 25 miles per hour based on the results that we received in our ENTS. Here's a table that provides speed limit reduction recommendations for areas outside of the downtown area, which is only based on ENTS results, with the intent that, with tonight's recommendation to introduce an ordinance and adopt the new speed limit reductions, we're going to continue to educate and inform the public, implement any signage and striping and improvements needed for the speed limit reductions. And as a future phase, we're looking at other areas within the city where we can apply AB 43. Areas, as Jimmy had mentioned, has higher levels of vulnerable users near community centers, parks, schools, and other bike and pedestrian networks. And that would include some of the streets that were listed in the comments that we received prior to tonight's meeting. As Jimmy also mentioned earlier, speed management application of AB 43 to reduce speeds is just one piece of the local road safety plan, which we adopted last year in April 2024. There are other plans, studies, and programs that we have in place to help us implement the LRSP. And with our roadway safety implementation program, we're working towards our Vision Zero action plan, implementing more high visibility crosswalks, and creating a toolbox of traffic calming measures. We also have our sidewalk repair program, and we're also continuing to, seek more grant funding so we can support these improvements. And recently, we found out we were awarded the ATP Active Transportation Program grant for Cycle 7, and then also the Regional Measure 3 grant. So all very exciting, and I think that it combines up to over $10 million of funding for infrastructure. And then here's just a snapshot of projects and ongoing infrastructure improvements that we have in our department's work plan. A couple closing thoughts. We're really trying to maximize safety impacts through a combination of education, enforcement, and implementing additional infrastructure improvements, and seeking to improve public health, livability, and safety outcomes by reducing speeds. So, as such, our recommendation for tonight is to introduce this ordinance that will allow us to reduce speed limits on 24 roadways. This concludes our presentation. Jimmy and I, along with Director Miller from Public Works, and then our police department is also available for questions.
Thank you, Assistant Director Kwok. Thank you, Jimmy, for that excellent presentation. I'll see if there are additional questions. Vice Mayor Bushy, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the detailed presentation. Those of us who have been through this, some of the speed limit evolutions in the city know only too well this history. So I bring that to bear on this, and it leads somewhat to my first question, which is about your enforcement plan. What are you intending to do to render this engineering discussion into action on our roads?
Welcome. We have the expert. Thank you for coming down.
Mayor, City Council. Thank you. So enforcement is really just a small component of this overall project. Of course, it's extremely important to be able to conduct enforcement. However, it won't happen before we have a significant amount of education, outreach, and certainly warning period while the community gets used to this change. We certainly still have to abide by the California Vehicle Code, which describes how we can issue citations specifically for speed. So as we spoke before, the prima facie versus the posted speed limit. So we certainly will continue to conduct enforcement with that in mind.
And would there be any extra outreach? I'm thinking of your signs that say you're going too fast or new speed limit or something like that.
Certainly, absolutely. So not just our social media and signage, but certainly the electronic signage. I know with the traffic engineers, anytime that there's changes in the posted speed limit, the signs are very well marked so that people see that it's different.
And do we have any sort of look back at some point in the future, a year or two, if this change in posted speed limits doesn't have the desired effect?
Certainly will, you'll cover the engineering portion of it, but certainly related to the collision data, absolutely. We're constantly tracking the collisions that occur. When an officer investigates a collision, we determine the primary collision factor, what caused the collision, and certainly speed is number one, and also directly related to many of the other collision factors. So we will certainly compare the statistics from previous years and before this goes into effect until the months and years after, for sure.
Very good. Thank you. That's the last of my questions on enforcement. My other question is more about the engineering study and what led you to select these particular locations that are outside of downtown. How did you prioritize those locations?
This is for the areas outside of downtown. So for the areas outside of downtown, they're really just based on our engineering and traffic survey. So it's based on locations where we've done speed assessments before.
And you've discovered what that led you to put them on this list? Because I'm sure many of our constituents have candidates for this list that are not on it.
Right.
Good point.
Thanks for the question. And it goes back to the complex nature of the inputs that went into the overall project. The citywide engineering and traffic surveys were conducted for all roadways in the city that don't have the presumed prima facie speed limit of 25 miles an hour. So for non-residential streets for the most part, and for non-commercial streets, that citywide engineering and traffic survey was conducted to align with that 7-year required cycle. So in addition to that, Assembly Bill 43 is an additional evaluation to engineering and traffic survey results. So our evaluation based on Assembly Bill 43 was only undertaken for downtown roadways as till this moment. Now, phase 2 of the project will take the engineering and traffic survey results and add that additional AB 43 evaluation. So roadways that are outside of downtown are still to be evaluated through the lens of AB 43's additional speed limit reduction ability, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess just going to get real specific. My constituents are very interested in Point San Pedro Road. Was Point San Pedro Road given equal consideration to these other locations that found themselves on this list?
I'll answer that one. April Miller, Public Works Director. So, so Point San Pedro Road was one of the roads that was part of the ENTS study. So we did look at the speed limits on there. If you look at all of the appendix that are that were included in the staff report, one of the roads was identified as being recommended to be lowered. The problem is between the city and county, which it goes in and out of, it was one random section amongst the entire street. So the plan for Point San Pedro Road, which I know we've met with the Point San Pedro Road Coalition, is that we want to look at the entire street and look at ways we could potentially reduce more than just a section, because it might be awkward to be driving down the road and randomly go lower and then go right back up, 200 feet later. So yeah, it was looked at. So we do have the studies for that, but our plan is to further explore it with the county so that we can take a holistic approach on the road sometime in the next year or two. And we're looking at the slurry seal project that's going to come up.
Okay, so there's an engineering reason for that road not being included and these particular ones being included.
Yeah, it was included in the study. It just wasn't included in the recommendations to lower because the ones that are lowered are only based on the 85th percentile. And we wanted to do more than that. We wanted to look at it with the AB 43 lens. We wanted to look at it with the county to make sure that we could, approach it together. And there's schools on that road. So there's other ways that can trigger it. We just have only looked at downtown for AB 43 at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ransculati?
Yes, I had I had the same question, so thank you for asking that. And thank you so much for the study. It's very comprehensive, and my question is very specific around Anderson Drive, and I noticed that there is I'm seeing here like 3 different sections. One section is I believe 35, then it goes to 30, then it goes 35. So I guess my concern is how, as a driver, how do they know that it's changing? And is that, how would you say it? Does it make sense that, it's only this section that it goes to 30, like either do the entire section, I guess the entire section is 35, anyway, do you know the section that I'm talking about? Like the one that goes from Bellam to Marine Sanitary type of area. That's 35. And then if you go from Bellam towards Dubois maybe, it's just as little. And I understand because that's where the bike path is crossing, but I'm just concerned that it might be too confusing for the drivers. So.
Thanks for bringing up Anderson Drive. Anderson Drive, as well as many other roadways, are on the plan for the second phase of this project. So we have the 85th percentile at a number of measured locations, but what we want to do is to look at, so up till now we've only looked at the 85th percentile results, but we want to look at all the other roadways in the city that could potentially meet the provisions of AB 43 and identify which ones have ability to reduce speed limits and also to ensure consistency of speed limits, which favors expected motorist behavior, as you mentioned. So up to this point, we've only looked at downtown streets through the lens of AB 43, but the second phase of the project plans to address roadways like Anderson Drive that are on the bike network, to address other roadways that are near schools, other roadways like D Street south of First that are adjacent to the community center. So there's a host of future roadways for evaluation through the AB 43 lens.
So the study that you have here, that you have provided, where you are looking at each segment with the recommendations, so that you are not going to be implementing those? You're saying that you are going to be going to phase 2 to implement? I'm a little bit confused about so it's in the report here. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the implementation, if it's phase 2, when that's going to happen, and how would you take this data and the recommendations from the data, and how would you change it to have like, from the same street, like the same speed limit, I guess?
Right. So with our recommendations tonight, we are proposing to implement those speed limit reductions with the ordinance. It gets recorded to the county and it gives our police department the ability to enforce the speed limits. But that does not, preclude us from coming back to apply AB 43 later and then lower the speeds if that's what the recommendation will show based on our evaluation with AB 43. Right now, we've only concentrated the evaluation to downtown area based on the results of our local road safety plan that identifies it as a high collision area. But as we kind of are planning to do following the implementation of our current speed limit reduction, we're going to look at citywide areas. So all the places that have been listed in the letters before tonight, and anywhere that's like close to schools, community centers, bikeways, we're going to look at all of that citywide as part of our future phase.
Okay, so just clarification, tonight we're just approving downtown.
Downtown and all the other areas that were listed based on ENTS. So
Okay.
AB 43 is just like another methodology that allows us to lower speeds. But ENTS on its own, it's also a way we can recommend speed limit changes.
Okay, that makes sense. So bringing it back to Anderson Drive, so tonight for Anderson Drive, are we approving the reduction of a speed limit in just that little segment?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, I guess that's my question. Yeah.
And maybe to add on, because I understand it, it is actually a very complex set of pieces that we're trying to align. The
Yep.
primary reason that we are also including all the recommendations from the ENTS report for the most part is because phase 2 will extend beyond October. And we want to approve these speed surveys from the ENTS before October to allow those speed limits to still be enforceable by radar, by the police department. So that citywide ENTS has to be adopted before October.
Mhm. But could it be possible to extend, if it makes sense in one street, again, Anderson Drive, to continue, like, can we lower the speed in the entire street? Or are we just really focusing on the recommendation based on 8043? And it can come back later.
Well, no, I
Like,
think tonight is one section
Right.
is what's being considered.
yes.
And I'm hearing staff say that other section could also be considered at a future time. And this is really the first phase of it. But it
Right.
won't preclude getting to what you're talking about. That's
Yeah, just to add, I know that Jimmy went over it, but there's a bunch of other things that we have to do in order to lower the speed limit on the rest of Anderson, for example, like doing more engineering studies, looking at the collision history. There's a bunch of things that we have to follow, and it also has to comply with AB 43. Like we have to justify that road fits in one of those categories. So, yeah, I think we bit off what we could on the AB 43, which was downtown, in order to be able to have these speed limits available and enforceable.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz, any questions?
No questions. Thank you. I mean, it's interesting to look up some of the key streets that we know of. I actually was looking at Point San Pedro as well, because when I was on the school board, Councilmember Micah probably remembers this as well. We did change the speed limit, I believe, in front of San Pedro School. And it actually went up. And it was interesting. So I think based on the future analysis as we're going forward and the new laws, it may be able to go down, which was the request. It's not really the behavior that happens there, but it was definitely the request. So it's interesting to see what has changed in that period of time around that. So I appreciate the work around this.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jimmy and Joanne, for the presentation. I have a couple questions. What is the timing for the citywide ENTS? And then what is the level of effort? So how long will it run? I'm imagining that the conditions for AB 43, it's a subset of the entire city. Not every road would be AB 43 conditional. So I'm just curious the timing, both when it starts and when we think it might end based on the containment of AB 43 qualified roads. While you're looking it up, I'll just say there's been a lot of interest in my inbox about this.
Right, yeah, and we do have a general like outline or timeline on our presentation. And, it's gonna take us a while before we can implement the new speed limits for, the ones that we're proposing to reduce tonight. We're gauging it's probably gonna be around late spring, summertime before we can get kind of like the signage, the striping out there to inform, and then there's also like a 30-day warning period. And during this time, we're still gonna start, we're gonna still take feedback on our online survey or see click fix for areas that others are interested in expanding the application of AB 43. So we're going to be looking at our input form even before we start evaluating other areas, just to make sure we are collecting feedback. And even as we're talking tonight, we're looking at how we can better get the messaging out there. And this is not the end, but just the beginning, I would say. We're probably looking, if we had to really gauge based on how long it took us from last year to get to now, it was about 6 months just for the downtown area. So, we're probably looking towards sometime late, end of this year, maybe even early next. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I received a question from a constituent. I think dynamic speed feedback signs are something that people have a great attraction to as a mechanism to tell folks what their speed is. 2 questions about that. Are they effective in reality? And then B, if they are, is there funding to implement? I don't think that they're the same cost as just producing a static sign.
Yeah, I might have to turn to Jimmy on the effectiveness, but it is something we're evaluating as part of our traffic calming toolbox, and we're able to fund that through our road safety implementation program and also partnering with PD on any temporary like signage that we can put up.
And it's a good question on effectiveness. I am aware of a lot of traffic calming conclusional research and published literature. I don't know of any on speed feedback signs. But speaking from feedback that we've got from communities, they are often found either somewhat effective, maybe minorly effective. We do hear comments sometimes that they can encourage speeding under very specific circumstances that can be known and understood. Typically the type of driver that's looking to see how high a number can be registered on a sign. But as long as those circumstances are addressed, in general, they are effective and included on many of our suggested traffic calming measures.
All right. Well, I hope that you're raising the specter of that does not encourage people to actually participate in that. So thank you, Jimmy. Those are my questions.
Thank you. I just have a couple follow-up to the excellent questions we've already heard. So thank you, Lieutenant Holm, for coming down and answering the very specifics about enforcement. So I was curious, and Joanna, I think you just talked about the warnings being 6 months, or the time period. What was the time period for a warning?
It's usually 30 days after we have the improvements kind of in place.
Okay, 30 days. Okay, that seems fast. People might need a little bit more education, but I know between you and SRPD, you will figure that out. I think that is a really critical part. And the toolbox that you keep talking about in terms of explaining to drivers that it's changed. I know you've talked about posted, we've talked about movable signs. I noticed on the picture of the San Jose that they actually had a big 20 painted on the street. Is that something that we'd be looking at as well for the downtown corridor? Because otherwise, when you start getting the signs up here, there's a lot of visual chatter that sometimes drivers might not see versus being on the road.
Yes, definitely. We're planning to implement both signage and striping to help get the message out there.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, there might be members of the public who have additional comments or questions. So if you would like to comment on this item, or if you have any questions, I will open up the public comment. Now is your chance. And you are welcome, but not required to say your name and what part of San Rafael you live in.
Hello, my name is Sharna Deemer in the Montecito area. And I'm just so curious about the studies of average speeds on the streets in my neighborhood. And I'm thinking particularly about Mission Avenue in the Montecito area. We have the high school. So saying it's when in the morning, the drop off of students, the afternoon, the pick up the students, just give them a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit is aspirational. I mean, it actually comes to gridlock. I don't know what you do about the speed limit, but in between, when the kids are coming going, they're going 40, 50 miles an hour. And that's a problem in our neighborhood. Then you get to Aldersley with the senior citizens who are taking more time. There is signage. And then there are a lot of people who are driving 5 miles an hour around our neighborhood looking for parking. So and this would happen downtown too. How do you decide? I mean, so much of downtown traffic is people looking for parking. So anyway, so the idea that there's some average in the Montecito area fascinates me.
Thank you. Additional public comment.
Shinji Sakai Ege. I rode my bicycle here and, just listening to this conversation, thank you for that presentation. Cars are totally different than they were before, right? So I think reducing speeds makes sense. I just wonder if cars are going to oblige, because you look at these electric cars and they're coming out of the gates quick kind of thing. So, good luck trying to slow them down. But I think the city of San Rafael, 4th Street, 5th Street, Mission, there's so much foundation here where there's traffic breaks already. I think a lot of that reduced speed kind of already happens. So I think the foundation is there. Obviously, we all know about the major streets and everyone's trying to get around. So I think it's important to communicate with people like me, bicyclists, scooters, pedestrians, runners. I mean, it usually takes two to have an accident. So it's not just cars too. I'm yelling at bikers. No one hears me. You guys can hear me, right? So people are we can't hear each other. People got headphones on, zombie mode out there, right? So I really do encourage you to get people to not listen to stuff when they're on stuff that could end their lifetime, right? So it's very important. I wonder if there's been any talk. Oh, Anderson, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm riding there like 12 o'clock at night, 1 in the morning sometimes, trying to get out to the bridge, and it's just that's a speedway. There's nothing slowing down people. There's huge trucks, even though there is a kind of a protected bike lane there, it's like I just don't want that screaming truck to go by me. So I think it's important that we reduce that speed all the way to Sir Francis Drake. But also I wonder if there's been any talks about separating cars and bicyclists completely. Like a lot of these areas, it is like that, right? So can we just add a little bit more and just close up the gaps? Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. It's nice to see you this evening. Enjoyed your presentation. Have a few questions, maybe some insight. I live on D Street, and I get to watch cars zoom through on a regular basis, and there seems to be a speedway developing over there. Muscle cars going up and down. So I'm hoping they're a target of your enforcement. But while I'm on enforcement, I'm wondering if the enforcement process requires the police or officer to go into court to demonstrate that they did in fact see this individual speed, or is it a more automatic system where you get the ticket, you pay the ticket, there's no argument? I don't know if you can do that, but that would definitely be easier than having the officer spend a lot of time in court. Also, trucks. I notice a lot of Amazon trucks, commercial trucks are driving around and at quite great speeds, pulling out and just zooming along to get to their next critical delivery. And that's dangerous for not only myself, but anybody else that's on the street. So I'm wondering if you're going to pay special attention to those types of individuals. The other thing I was looking at is if you get pulled over for speeding, you may also be guilty of other infractions. You may be drunk, you may not be legal, as they say. You may have violated some other things. So I don't know if that's part of your consideration to say, what do we do with those? Do we just give them the ticket, or do we proceed to infract them for all the things that they may be guilty of, which may or may not include a greater amount of time of the police department? So that seemed to be one concern. I know this is outside the scope of what you're doing, but right on red, I would love to see that thing eliminated downtown, because that certainly is an area where a lot of people are looking this way when the thing that
Thank
they're
you.
going to
If you
hit is
could-
over there. So that to me, especially downtown.
Thank you. If you could conclude your
I'm at-
public
oh,
comment.
Jeez.
Thank you. We got your questions, and you can always email us, as you know, with additional questions. Any other comments or questions on this item? Not seen any. I'll close the public comment and bring it back. So the questions that I had heard was a concern about Mission. So if you could speak to Mission Street. There was some input about other biking improvements, which I know you could speak to that as well, even though that's not what's on the agenda this evening, but I think it's worth just a quick 30-second on that. And then enforcement protocol, everything from court appearance to if there are other infractions occurring. And I don't know if that's a Lieutenant Holm question, but what is done in those cases?
Thank you. I'll address the question about Mission and more in general, how we measure speeds in an engineering and traffic survey when there are highly varied types of motorists on the roadway. You might recall the bell curve of speeds captured that I presented as an example. Thanks, Joanna, for bringing that on the screen. This is all of these speeds that are captured are done in strict accordance with, there's a manual on establishing speed limits that's set forth by the California Department of Transportation. And as mentioned, the idea is to capture free flow, unimpeded speeds. And that would be motorists that are not, for instance, slowed down by the presence of pickup or drop off. That would be motorists that are not slowed down by distractions or in search of on-street parking. So a bell curve like this would be only measuring the vehicles that have no impedance to their speed. So the middle of the day is typically when we take speed surveys, as there's not school traffic or other impediments such as congestion during the peak traffic hours. And that is actually one of the aspects that typically lends to higher rates of measured travel, because we are, in accordance with the California Vehicle Code, capturing the fastest vehicle speeds on the roadway. So hopefully that describes a little bit of why, how this bell curve comes to be on streets with highly varied traffic situations.
Thank you. Lieutenant Holm, do you want to? Let him, he's standing there, he's getting ready to go. So really, you heard the questions, I think, around court appearances, if there's other infractions that are observed.
Yes, if an officer chooses to issue a citation for speed, just like any other citation, the person has a choice to pay the ticket, or of course they can contest it in traffic court. This speeding violation is no different than say a stop sign, and they certainly have the right to contest the ticket as well. When an officer makes a traffic stop, of course, if they see something else, for instance, the person's intoxicated, then absolutely the officer will take appropriate investigative action at that time.
Thank you. Thank you for answering. Okay, last question on any bikeway improvement. Really, because I know That's a separate meeting, but still, if you could just,
Yeah.
maybe speak to
So
that.
we're actually we just kickstarted our citywide bike and ped plan update. And we actually have a website where we're taking in suggestions on improvements. And if you're not able to find that, a great alternative is to submit a suggestion on our C-Click Fix, and then we will transfer that input into our citywide bike and ped plan update effort.
Thank you. So I'll turn to my colleagues for additional comments or questions. Vice Mayor, Councilmember. Additional question, Councilmember Lorenz Galati, and then a comment. Any comments you'd like to make too?
Yes, more like comments, actually.
Okay.
I just wanted to reiterate how important is the education and the communications with the community, especially I think we have like a very sensitive times that we live around national politics and whatever else is coming, and I will name specifically ICE. There is a lot of fear in the community, so I think we just have to be aware of that and make sure that people are aware that this is, our police doesn't cooperate with ICE, and this is enforcement, but be sensitive around that. So just a little comment around that. And then the other one was the continuity. It would be great to have, as a driver, I think is very confusing when you are continuously changing the speed limits. And I know we have to follow AB 43, but how we can implement it in a way that is not confusing. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jimmy and Joanna, for the presentation, and Lieutenant Holm for other comments about enforcement. I think that in the journey that I've been on as a council member, I've found the laws in the state of California around speeding to be very counterintuitive. I had thought coming into this role that, oh, well, a city should have authority over how speeds are defined, and I was pretty shocked to understand once I got into learning more from both Public Works and San Rafael Police Department that we do not have full authority. They are guided by very specific laws, and they're very wide and deep in complexity. And AB 43, I think, makes a lot of sense in terms of how we are applying it. As representative for District 2, downtown is an area that we all know by data is a place of high collision rate between cars, cyclists, and pedestrians, cars to bicyclists and cars to pedestrians. So I'm very thrilled to be able to support our ordinance this evening to provide for safer speeds. I was thrilled also to hear Jimmy and Joanna to bring engineering to bear to how we are going to get there and to use our laws to our advantage. By my layperson experience, I do think that the speed creep phenomenon that you were describing, Jimmy, rings true to me. And I think it creates unsafe environments for our communities. So I'm glad that we're turning that corner. I also want to acknowledge that enforcement by San Rafael Police Department is not the only mechanism. I know a lot of folks, I think, probably think that is the way forward. There are many factors involved there. I do think that the engineered environment, the signage, and even just community education, understanding, and modeling, I think, are important. So as folks start to see those signs come up, please, I would encourage everyone to go at safe speeds. It's been unsafe for a long time. So I'm very much looking forward to voting in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Lieutenant Holm. That was an excellent presentation for all the reasons that Councilmember Hill just described, the complexity around speed limits. To me, the slide that showed the fatality rate between 20 miles an hour and 40 miles an hour is really going to stick with me. And the fact that our city, and with the help of parametrics, has come forward and said, we want to do this. This is an important tool in our toolbox. So again, hats off to the department and to our city for showing our values, which is we want to have safe streets for pedestrians and for cyclists. So thank you both, all three of you. For this item, I would request a motion, and it has particular language in here. So have your sheet in front of you if you're making the motion.
I move that we introduce an ordinance regarding speed limit change on 24 San Rafael roadway segments pursuant to sections 22357.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry.
Down here, recommended
Sorry,
action.
I move that we introduce the ordinance, waive further reading of the ordinance, and refer to it by title only. That
Thank
was
you.
much
I'll
shorter.
second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Lorenz Galati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. I request the city clerk to read the title of the ordinance.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Centerville regarding speed limit change on 24 Centerville roadway segments pursuant to sections 22357 and 22358 of the California Vehicle Code.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is the Police Advisory and Accountability Committee Annual Report. And I see Fatai and Daniel and Paula and Salama and Darlin in the audience, so thank you for being here. I see Lieutenant Eberly joining us. Welcome. Welcome, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor Kate, members of the City Council. I wanted to just take a moment and introduce this item if I can. This next item is the annual report for the Police Advisory and Accountability Committee. In fact, this is the first annual report on behalf of the committee to the council. So staff is really excited to join the members of the PAC that are here tonight and present this information to you. The committee has two liaisons, Lieutenant Eberly from the Police Department and Miss Angela Robinson-Pignon from the City Manager's Office. And last year's chair, Miss Paula Camina, is going to join in the presentation with Lieutenant Eberly in terms of the annual report. So with that, I just want to say thank you to the members of the PAC that are here tonight. 5 of our 9 members are here, and we're really excited to present the item tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Eberly.
Thank you, Chief Spiller.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and members of the community. I appreciate, my name is Scott Eberly. I'm a lieutenant with the police department. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight about the first year of the Police Advisory and Accountability Committee. This past year has been one of growth, learning, and laying the groundwork for meaningful dialogue between our community and the San Rafael Police Department. I also want to take a moment to express my sincere thanks to all the committee members that are here today and that are not here. I know that it is a big responsibility to show up once a month. It's not just the 1 or 2 hours of the meeting, but it's also everything in between, engaging with their community. So I really want to thank you all for what you do. As with any new initiative, we spent much of this year navigating the process. We familiarized ourselves with the Brown Act. A special thank you to our city attorney for your guidance. We tackled the technological aspects, everything behind the scenes, and all the meeting procedures, rules, and laws. A sincere thank you to our city clerk, Lindsay Lara. Through it all, we remained focused on one key goal: establishing a strong foundation for understanding our police department and its role in our community. I want to express my deep appreciation to our city manager, Christina Lilovich, for her leadership and unwavering commitment to making this committee a reality. Also to, of course, my boss, our police chief, for your wisdom and insight. You've been invaluable as we found our way through this first year. And of course, a special thank you to Assistant City Manager, my partner, Angela Robinson-Pignon, and our PAC analyst, Teresa Olson, whose dedication and organization have kept us on track throughout this past year. A major highlight of our first year was a deep dive into policing itself. Committee members learned about key laws and policies that govern law enforcement, including the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, POBAR, Senate Bill 2, which POBAR establishes legal protections for officers during disciplinary investigations, ensuring due process while maintaining accountability. Understanding these rights helps frame discussions on accountability and internal investigations. Senate Bill 2, on the other hand, introduced a statewide police officer certification process and created a mechanism for decertifying officers who engage in serious misconduct. This is a critical reform aimed at strengthening accountability and ensuring that officers who violate the public trust cannot simply move from one department to another. We also explored internal affairs and the complaint process, focusing on how the department investigates misconduct allegations and steps involved in an officer accountability and the role of internal review. Understanding this process is essential to evaluating fairness, transparency, and how complaints from the public are addressed. Law enforcement training was another key topic. Committee members gained insight into the rigorous and continuous training officers undergo, including de-escalation techniques, crisis intervention, implicit bias awareness, and use of force, decision-making. The goal is to prepare officers for the complex and often unpredictable situations they face while emphasizing professionalism, ethics, and community engagement. We also took a deep dive into recruitment and hiring, discussing the challenges of attracting qualified candidates in today's environment is sometimes very difficult. Committee members learned about the extensive selection process, which often can take 2 to 4 months, which includes written exams, psychological evaluations, background investigations, and oral board interviews. This discussion also touched on efforts to recruit diverse candidates and ensure our department reflects the community it serves. I want to highlight as one of PAC's success stories is that now we include a PAC member on every oral board new hire interview that we do. So far, many of the members have participated in over a dozen interviews and have been insightful, asked poignant questions, and overall been able to impact the people who will someday serve and protect our community. By examining these topics along with use of force, alternative response, domestic violence, internal investigations, committee members developed a foundational understanding of key aspects of policing. This introductory approach ensured that by the time they participated in the ride-alongs, they had some background and context to engage in more informed and meaningful discussions about their police practices and decision-makings with the officers who actually are on the street. Each ride-along was unique, which I know many of you have experienced, yet from the feedback, all carrying a consistent message. That message was empathy in the interactions with the public. When I heard this, it gave me pride. We are not perfect. We are always aiming for improvement, but hearing these stories from the PAC members was really special to me. Some committee members are still scheduled for ride-alongs, and I look forward to hearing their insights as well, as I know there is a big push for more ride-alongs. Throughout the year, we explored a range of important issues, including youth and policing, homelessness, police technology, drones. Our goal, though, extended beyond simply understanding policy. We wanted to pull back the curtain to show the human side of policing and explain not just what we do, but why we do what we do. This year has been an important step in fostering open communication between the police department and the community. We recognize that understanding community needs is not something we should assume. It's something that we actively seek. What can we do to improve? What are we doing too much of? Or what should we focus on? While we may not always agree as a department, as a committee, or even as a community, it is crucial that every voice is heard. Everyone's input is necessary for making more informed decisions. That is why we felt it is essential to capture each committee member's perspective and recommendations in our annual report, rather than focusing on a consensus or forcing a vote. A great example of this approach was our approach on youth and policing. The topic sparked very diverse opinions, particularly regarding school resource officers. Instead of issuing a broad statement of support or opposition, we captured individual viewpoints. Out of that discussion came a greater curiosity about the relationship between officers and youth, and a commitment to bring this topic back in 2025. This time with more input, or some input, from our youth population. The meetings structure, everything was new to us. The meeting structure was designed to address a community area concern or a topic over a 2-month period. In the first month, the topic was presented, followed by discussion and public comment. Then the topic was revisited the following month to allow for additional feedback. This approach provided community members with opportunity to listen to the presentation, ask initial questions, and then take time to conduct further research, engage with their community, gather additional perspectives, and when the topic was brought back next month, members could provide more informed feedback and raise any questions or concerns that may not have been addressed on the initial presentation. Our initial meeting was in December of 23, followed closely by our second meeting in 2024, where we focused on foundational tasks that included introductions to public meetings, led by our Assistant City Attorney, our City Clerk, Lindsay Laura, as well as an in-depth discussion on the history and firsthand experience of the Police Advisory Committee presented by Francine Tornor, Director of the Office of Police Oversight for the City of Long Beach. During these initial sessions, we went over the bylaws. Thank you to City Manager Christina Lilovich and our City Attorney Rob Epstein for helping facilitate those meetings, and also selected a chair, a co-chair, and developed a work plan for key topics for discussion throughout the year. In February, the committee was introduced to the department's command staff and organizational structure. Additionally, we received our first presentation from an area of concern. That first presentation was on recruitment and selection. And as a result of the discussions from the meeting, committee members, as I said, were recommended that a representative from the committee participate in the oral boards. And we are pleased to report that when we do have new hires entering the police department at every level, we invite a member of the PAC committee. In March, the committee members learned about internal affairs and complaint process, which led to a better understanding of employee discipline and the process. March also provided an opportunity to revisit recruitment and selection, where the committee recommended that cultural awareness and diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging training be incorporated for all members of the department. We are proud to report that SRPD has since implemented mandatory cultural awareness training and requiring all employees to complete DEIB training. Additionally, committee members underscored the critical importance of diversity within our own ranks. I'm happy to report that over the past 2 years, we've successfully hired 24 sworn police officers, some of whom are still in training. But of those, 8 are of Latinx descent and native Spanish speakers, and 7 of them are female, reflecting our commitment to fostering a more diverse workforce. These efforts bring us closer to our goal of achieving 30% female sworn officers within our ranks by 2030. And I'm very proud to say that currently we're at 25%. We're almost there. In April, we presented on military equipment, during which committee members provided feedback suggesting that we would benefit from implementing its own drone program. But this topic was revisited in December with more comprehensive presentation. In May, we introduced the Specialized Assistance for Everyone program. Everybody loved the SAFE team. We love the SAFE team. The primary concern raised by the committee was the sustainability of the program, but I am pleased to report that Lieutenant Todd Behringer, along with Teresa Olson, are actively seeking grants and funding to make this a more sustainable program. After a scheduled break in June, we resumed meetings in July with a presentation on domestic violence and then a use of force presentation in August. Committee members expressed support for establishing a K-9 program, and as you are aware, we are pleased to announce that K-9 Tango and Officers DeBolt are currently in service, protecting our community. October's meeting focused on youth and policing in San Rafael and was very well attended by the community members and a representative from the San Rafael City School Board. While no formal recommendations were made regarding the potential reintroduction of school resource officers, there was a strong emphasis on gathering direct feedback from the youth. Accordingly, this discussion is scheduled to return to the PAC in early fall of 2025, and Teresa and I have already begun with Angela, collaborating with Youth Transforming Justice to organize listening circles so we can hear directly from the students of San Rafael High School. Later in October, we addressed homelessness in San Rafael, and the committee raised numerous concerns and questions about the city's sanctioned encampment and strongly recommended that the PAC also receive regular updates on the state of homelessness in San Rafael. While no meeting was held in November, we reconvened in December to discuss the annual report and the role of technology in policing. This discussion included updates on automatic license plate readers and drones. And while there was mostly support for a drone program, there were also calls for further research into the potential challenges as well as additional community input. So we do plan on bringing this topic back in April of 2025. Moving forward, the road ahead. One of our committee members recently, I think, said it best, is this is a year for work. I couldn't agree more. In 2025, the PAC is energized and ready to tackle a new set of critical topics. Starting tomorrow with ICE and immigration, we will also have presentations this year on human trafficking, prostitution, police culture, police transparency, homelessness, military equipment and technology, and the Racial Identity Profiling Act, also known as RIPA, and then, of course, youth and policing. We look forward to continuing this work and bringing thoughtful, well-informed recommendations to City Council. Thank you for your time and your continued support. I now want to turn it over to our chair, our first chair of the PAC, Paula Camino.
Thank you, Lieutenant Eberle and Mayor Kate. Good evening, council members and community members. I'm honored to be here today. Lieutenant Eberle has fully explained the work that we have done, and I'm not going to repeat that. It has been a very energetic group. When we first got together, I think few of us knew each other, and we're a very diverse group. We don't always have the same opinion at all, but I think we've grown to respect each other and work together as a team to see what we can do to make sure that our police department is one of the best. And I kind of think they are already. Yeah. Chief Spiller has been very helpful. We're grateful for City Manager Alilovich helping us in the beginning to get started, and Angela and Lindsay, City Clerk, and Rob Epstein. Everybody has just been so helpful in getting us educated to where we need to be. And my theory is that if you're going to sit on a committee that advises and makes suggestions for the police department, you should actually know what that department does in and out. And to that end, we were honored to be asked to sit on oral boards for hiring interviews and do ride-alongs. The oral board was very interesting. It brought back many memories for me, but a lot of the members that were sitting on the board were very interested in and actually pleased to know that the quality of the candidates that seek to be hired in San Rafael, whether it's police, the dispatchers, or whichever position, are all really qualified and what they have to go through to get here. So it's a very good experience. I have to tell you about my ride along though. I hadn't been in a patrol car for many, many years, and I want to say there's not a lot of room in there anymore because of all the equipment. But my officer was very kind and polite, and we started out looking for a rental car that had not been returned to the rental agency in a timely manner. So we went up to the apartment building where it was supposed to be found. It wasn't there. And then we got a call to help assist on a stolen white van that was a delivery van. The driver of the van had gotten out of the car to deliver a package, and somebody snuck in and stole the van. And so there was a lot going on there. But then we went back to look for the other van and patrolled around, and all of a sudden we got a call back to go back to the white van because it was found in a cul-de-sac. And this driver was so smart. He had left a pair of earbuds in the car. So he did the Find My app, and there was his van with all the packages in it, sitting in a cul-de-sac, for sure waiting for the thief, right, to come back and get the packages in another van. But the problem was he did not have a second set of keys, and the van was locked. So the question with many patrol officers, and myself included, was how are we going to help this man get his van back? And the window was open this much. So one of us thought of a coat hanger, and because it wasn't opened enough to put your hand in. And eventually we got a coat hanger from a neighbor so the whole neighborhood was involved. It was really wonderful. And so that got resolved. Then we got a call that the rental car was back at the house. And so it was up on a hill, and the apartment had a curve on the street, and my officer parked around the curve. And then another officer came to assist, and he was, to me, younger and less experienced. And the officer who was driving our car was so kind. They went over the plan. It was not, I know more than you. It was educational, teamwork. At that point, I was very impressed. And so since I was obvious there was going to be an arrest involved because the person was home, I asked my officer, I said, do you prefer that I stay in the car? And it was like 102 degrees outside. And so it was a very hot day. And he said, well, yes, I think it would be safer if you stayed in the car. And he started to get out. and said, oh, but I need to leave you the keys so you can have the air conditioning on. He looked at me and said, I feel like I'm leaving a kid in the car. It was just, I mean, he was so caring. So they were gone for quite some time and I became curious. So I poked my nose out of the car and looked around the corner and I know I can't stand it. Here were these two officers, full gear. I don't know how much it weighs, but it's very hot and 102 degrees, taking baby toys, clothes, everything that had been in this car. The woman had kept the car longer than her insurance agency had paid, and they were doing everything to make sure that this woman had her belongings and that the children were safe, and decided, of course, not to arrest her, but to cite her so that the children could be there, could be with their mother. At one point during our day, the police radios went out, and the first thing my officer said was, "Officer safety." And it makes you realize, so then they started communicating by cell phone and other ways, but it really makes you realize what they face every day. It was a wonderful experience and to learn what they actually do every day with all the equipment and so forth, but the kindness and caring was wonderful. I want to thank you for, and this year has been very insightful to me to be on this team, and I'm honored that you selected me, and I'm honored that our team who's here elected me to be the first chair and keep me actually as the first chair in spite of a kerfuffle, I would call it. So anyway, it's been a wonderful experience, and thank you. We're really we're very involved in what is presented and very interested in making sure that we have a safe and excellent police department. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure there'll be comments from the council, but I'll start with questions before we get to comments after we have public comment. Vice Mayor, any questions?
Some high-level questions.
Yes.
I'm gathering, or maybe it's inferring from your report, that you failed this first year to be a successful foundational year, and that you are recommending that we continue this program and that we support your efforts in that in that way. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yes, that would be accurate.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Do you require anything from us? That's another purpose of the report, is that you come here and tell us what you've done and seek additional guidance from us should you need any.
Just accept the report today. Is the only thing I can think of right now.
And schedule the next annual report.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds good. And I will share afterwards with the select group my story of a ride.
We're not kind of a ride-along story meeting. Councilmember Hill, any questions?
No questions. I'll reserve for comment.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz, any questions?
The only question I have, and you're not really at that point yet, but thinking ahead, in terms of like onboarding new members, what that process might look like in terms of, I don't even know whether how you would onboard, because you've done so much work in history to educate the current group. How would you bring up a new member?
I think that's a great question. We initially staggered the start times so that when the first group are done with their tenure, there will still be some senior members left on the board. As far as the recruiting, I'm definitely going to reach out to our committee members, and this is a community-based connected committee, so I would hope that they would try to advocate and recruit and the ways that we would normally do recruitment through social media and going to different community meetings.
Yep, Chief Spiller, you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore that, the community participation and connection is super important for this committee. And as this council did in selecting the initial committee, we would seek direction from the clerk and then work with the council in terms of identifying future committee members to replace at that rotating transition.
Thank you.
And just one more sort of side question related to that is around the roles and responsibilities of the members of the committee. Again, just so people know as they come in and as positions open up, the expectation in terms of
Absolutely.
that. Is it, I've tried to look a little bit on the site to see it may already be there in terms of the roles and responsibilities. Or maybe that's a future item for consideration.
It's actually a very good thought and a good suggestion. I think that since seem to be good at working as a team, we haven't formed any subcommittees yet, but I think that actually would be a good one to form so that we can make sure that anybody who comes on board would be educated. We've received so much education.
Right.
It's been incredible. And also there's the possibility that people whose terms are up might be interested in reapplying, because I'd hate to see anybody go.
Right. But also to provide others. the
Yes, that does.
Great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Scolari, questions?
Yes, thank you. I'll definitely have comments. This is very exciting and great to see you all. I guess my question is around the community. How is the process of you going to the community for feedback about something that you want to bring from the city, and also how you're gathering feedback that you're hearing, like from the community, and bringing it to the committees? What's the process to decide on what are the topics that you are going to be studying?
So as far as deciding what topics, we plan on doing this every year. We had a special meeting in the beginning of January and invited as many community members as we possibly can to talk about the work plan of 2025. And then there's nothing else on the agenda except for what we want to talk about, what the PAC wants to talk about in 2025.
Great.
As far as reaching out to, go ahead. Yeah.
Please, no, go ahead.
I don't want to talk for the committee members. So here's.
No, I'm just saying that the committee members are very vested in reaching out to the community. They've actually been reaching out to get better acquainted with each other. So at each meeting, they give a report on what activities they've been involved in. Member Locks is a member of the Senior Advisory. Oh, okay. But people are involved in various activities, and they seem to interconnect and ask the community what's concerned. And there's always room to hear more, you know.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just have two questions. One is on the topic agendas items. There were so many that you've covered, but I noticed that the flock or license plate reader has not been one of the topics that that's a new topic that is related to policing in San Rafael. So I was curious.
That was covered under automatic license plate readers.
Okay, so that
we
was,
did-
I saw automatic licensing. Okay, so that was the December one.
But good catch.
Last one, yes.
Okay. It was called something a little different. Okay, just want to make sure.
Everybody thought it was great.
Yeah, well, the general public has been appreciative as
wonderful.
well. Yeah, thank you. And then the last question, so when the PAC was formed, and boy, I can't believe how much work you've done in a year, but there was great interest from some very vocal members of the broader community. They weren't all from San Rafael, that came here and gave a lot of input. So I'm curious, have you had outside public participation at your publicly noticed meetings? And has it been a broad group, or is it some regular folks that have been committed to showing up over a period of time?
We have had a broad group, a diverse group that has showed up and brought their input. And I could speak for myself. It's very valuable. We want to hear every side of the community. And with that, I think the committee brings valuable insight from when they're on their quote unquote days off from the PAC and they're talking to their own personal neighbors and friends and family. They bring that perspective as well. But as far as each meeting, there's some diverse broad group outside of San Rafael, people that do show up.
Actually, I might say, so there's some people, several people come to every meeting and comment. I believe one person's from Novato, some are from San Rafael. Every once in a while, there's a person that might be interested in a particular topic. I will say that in the beginning, the main issue was that they thought it was unfortunate that I was on the committee, and we listened, and I'm still here, but I'm not chair anymore, so that might appease some people. But it seemed to me after a period of time that that wasn't a topic anymore, and that people really thought about getting down to the work and listening to what the other committee said. I'm looking forward to working with the new chair, Fatai Takalai, and the vice chair, Mr. Davidi. They'll be great. It'll be
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you. I know it was a sensitive question, but I think that was important to know
Sure.
who else was in the room. So
Yeah.
thank you. I'll open up to the public to comment on this agenda item. If you have any questions or additional comments, we'd be interested in hearing it. As always, you're welcome but not required to state your name and what part of San Rafael you live in.
Salama, an alternate member of the committee. I want to thank our city manager for commenting on the two things I was going to comment on. So thank you very much. What I wanted to say is we've given you a comprehensive report, and I do think that Lieutenant has summarized it quite well. On page 14, one of the things that I wanted to add about our ride-alongs, I won't go into, as descriptive, but for me, who often gives constructive feedback to the committee members as well as to our supportive staff, I wanted to make sure that my comments about my ride-along were included, and I forgot to tell them to put them in there. So one of the things that I felt was really important to let you know the positives, not just the criticisms, but the positives. And in my particular ride-along, which is the ride-along topics are on page 14 of the annual report, during my encounters, I wanted it to be expressed that I had encounters from all age groups, like young adults to older adults, different racial groups. These are all the interactions, different racial groups, different socioeconomic groups, like homeless or living in your van kind of things and other things without going into the actual topics. And in all cases, as our former chair has said, that you could tell that it was from the top down. It was from the top down that they were engaging in that empathy for others, as well as wanting to be having a focus of rehabilitation versus punishment. And that was evident in each of the encounters that I participated in, including an elder abuse case, for which I have great interest in advocating for older adults. So I just wanted to share that there were many positives, of which I had not expected, but that I did get to actually see with my very own eyes and experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Salama. Additional comments? Now is your chance.
Thank you for that presentation and your service. Yeah, this is important. I just want to speak as a member of the public. This is just my perspective. I went to a meeting, where we talked about the license plate readers and stuff like that, and it was great. I would encourage people to show up, the public to get involved. Here's my perspective, right? I see police accountability sitting next to the police department, right? So I just wonder how much you all are going hand in hand, right? So I think one thing that would be really important is to connect more with the public, right? Those communities where we do tend to have more interaction with the police, right? I mean, not every place is policed the same way at the same level, right? That's been said here and that's been made clear. So I would encourage you to, the public, how do we contact you all, right? Say I go through personal trauma with some police officer and, do I want to call and talk to a police officer? Probably not, right? So that communication, to have that kind of a to be comfortable enough to call something like this without it just escalating and getting worse and that kind of thing. That's tough. I would encourage you to look at other neighboring jurisdictions and how they do this, as some of them have been around longer. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alvateri, Gersel Park. Reading the news, I don't know if this affects you at all, but it seems that the powers that be have it in their mind to destroy anything that has the initials DEI in it. And I understand that you're doing the right thing, but you may be the target of abuse by dictatorial regimes, I guess is the best way to put that. I appreciate what the police do. I understand you do a very difficult job and you're very good at it. I've seen you in action, and I don't want to say I'm anxious to get arrested, but I have been involved in police, and I appreciated their attention to detail and kindness in the situation that I was involved in. What I don't hear is, and maybe that's for a later meeting, what I did hear is the public is becoming more aware of the job that you do and understanding the difficulty of it and the expertise that you provide to it. But I'm not seeing the other side where the people who are providing that service are learning, I did hear the word empathy, but learning how to act differently, to approach people in a way that they would say, I understand I did a fault and now I have to pay the price, whether it be a ticket or something more extreme. I'm not seeing that end of it. So if there is some change, specific change that has been made to how the police manage their workload, I would like to understand that too. Again, I haven't had a chance to read your report, so maybe that is in there, and my question will be answered by reading that later when I have some more time. Anyway, that's really all the questions and comments I have.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on this item? Not seeing anyone, I'll close the public comment. So I think I heard some great comments, so thank you. Some specific questions around how to make a police report, a concern around the use of the acronym DEI, and then if there's been a change in police workload, given the existence of the PAC.
Yeah, I heard the same questions and how to call the police. I also heard might not want to talk to the police.
Correct.
And as I brought up the wonderful SAFE team, they not only have decreased the officer's workload, but they are an alternative response to what otherwise would have been a policing incident is now maybe more of a mental health or a substance abuse incident.
I actually have one comment, which is that, well, as a committee, it's not our responsibility, or we're not permitted to actually accept complaints. Being a member of the committee, we have gotten complaints, and I have always referred them to Lieutenant Eberly, and also if the person that I've talked to, I've referred them to other agencies perhaps that might be helpful. So if that helps answer, I don't know.
Thank you. And maybe on the DEI question, we can ask the city manager to weigh in.
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to chime
Yeah,
in on
thank
that.
you.
Mayor
Thank
Kate.
you.
Sure. I would just say that our local initiatives here, that the city's initiatives around DEIB work are not, the federal government policies are not relevant to what we're doing here locally in San Rafael. And the city council's direction and one of their key policy focus areas is around our DEIB work. So our commitment to continuing to do training for the entire workforce is in full effect and unaffected by federal policy.
Thank you. And I think the last question was around if there's been changes in the police workload or the interaction, I guess it was really. Probably police culture, which I think you have talked to.
Yeah, I mean, I could just speak from,
Yeah.
policing is different, culture is different from when I started 25 years ago. There was a lot more emphasis on de-escalation, cultural awareness, bias-based policing. All of these classes are mandated not only in the police academy when these officers are going through, but also when they're actively employed by us through POST the Peace Officers Standards and Trainings has not only recommendations, but mandates that we attend these classes. And just lastly, it's not only the police officers that go through these. Our police records and the police dispatchers also have a touch with the public, and they also attend these classes, so they are better educated and understand.
Thank you. I'll turn to my colleagues for additional comments on this before we vote on accepting the report. So Vice Mayor Bushy.
Thank you. I'd like to commend our staff and the committee members for putting in the work and having the courage to create this committee, because it's really hard when you don't have a format to follow and you have to dig deep to your values and reflect the values of the community and invent this process. So I commend you all for the work, for having the courage and the curiosity to create this tremendous first-year track record. It's a wonderful reflection on our staff, our committee, and our community, that we are able to come together and build the bridges from our differences to make a stronger law enforcement presence in our community. So thank you all for your work. Can't wait to see what you do in your second year. So I'll be delighted to accept the report.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz, comments?
Well said. I was going to say, similar along the same lines as Councilmember Bushy, many jurisdictions, and I think us as well at the very beginning, were a bit nervous around going down this path. How was it going to actually come together? How is our community going to come together? And I think many jurisdictions would just say, we're not going to go down this path because it feels like a big lift. It feels harder. It feels like we're opening up a door that we're not sure what's going to happen. Well, we didn't know what was going to happen either. And thank you to everyone for the work that you really have put into this on all sides. I mean, it really has taken a huge commitment, but I think that commitment has paved the path for so much work to go forward. And I think it's one of those opportunities that there may be bumps along the way, or there may be problems, but because of the work that you've already established with the community and with the education that's been happening, you've established that structure that you can now have that conversation. And the fact that you're opening up the conversation to, it's a public meeting, right? And you're reaching out to other groups to participate, and in welcoming those voices. And, you started with on the site, it does say, promoting accountability and transparency. And you really have led that all the way through for the year, and also looking forward to next year. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, former Chair Kamena and Lieutenant Eberly, for your presentation tonight. And of course, Chief Spiller. I will build on my colleagues' comments. You mentioned many names at the beginning, Lieutenant Eberly, and I won't go over every single name again, except that I will call out one. Francine Tornor was really instrumental. I thought, she's not in this room, of course, but she was here. I think she's associated with the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And I thought in the early days, she came in, at least from my perspective, with a calm and a steadiness to say, look, we will find our way forward. It's not going to be easy, and it may not appease everyone who wants it to look a certain way. I know that there were voices that were demanding, subpoena power to the committee, and she was like, well, we're not going to probably start with that. And I do think that that was, of course, the right call. I believe that when I watch and I do watch every meeting, I learn something new. While all of that information that is going over, and there's much more ahead, is available to the public, the way that the experts come in and talk about it and educate the community, and to what Councilmember Kurtz said, it's on the record. And it's there for everyone to understand. And as I look into the future, I see that as laws change, this will be a forum for the community to be educated. I also want to honor every person who steps forward to serve on the committee. What I've enjoyed about the committee is that I see so much contrasting opinion, which we need. I think it's as reflective of our community as we had hoped for. So thank you, committee members, for showing up every time to bring your perspective and to create challenge. There is no cookie cutter approach to this. And I will just say too, I honor every community member who shows up and their voices, and I appreciate that it is taken in. And then I appreciate every police officer, as well as the leadership in our police department, specifically Chief Spiller, for demonstrating leadership in genuinely embracing what this committee can and should be. So as my council member colleagues so far have said, I am looking forward to what year 2 and beyond bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Yorenz Gulati.
Well, I echo everything that has been said. I remember the time when we were going from like weekly meetings with Mayor Kate and city manager. We had a subcommittee, Chief Spiller, Francine. I'm glad that you mentioned her as well, and community members. We talked to a lot of different people, and just like we knew that we wanted to have something that the community will be represented, that you could bring topics from the community to us. But I have a lot of gratitude for all the members that they are in the committee, because I'm very happy with the diversity, the different groups that you represent. I'm very grateful as well for our police department, Chief Spiller, and everybody else, because the openness and really being able to change sometimes is not easy. So I think it's really important to be able to listen to the community. There's always room for improvement. I think it's so important also for the community to know how the police department works, the complexity, and really understand why sometimes decisions are made. So I think it's just, I'm very impressed with the first year. I also agree with what's going to be on the second year. And I'm excited about the topics that you have for this coming year, especially around the youth and having a safe space where the community can bring issues that sometimes they might not be comfortable bringing it directly to a police member, but have like a different sources where that information can come over. Because again, there's always room for improvement, and the more connected we are, the better work we are going to do. So, but I'm really appreciate our police department and the complexities that you have every day, and you never know what's going to happen. So I think those ride-alongs, I still have to do mine, but I've done one, but it hasn't had much adventures yet. So, but thank you. I really appreciate all of you and the work that you're doing. So thanks.
Thank you. And my colleagues made excellent reports, or comments, so I'll just add on a little bit. That was an excellent report. Thank you both, as well as the committee members that came out tonight. And I guess you'll be here again tomorrow night. This was, the committee was formed because of a break in trust that happened in our community. And as we tried to find a way forward, we felt that this was an important tool. And as already been said, PACs, and they go by different names, are difficult, not even just because it's from the ground up, but because of the trust that you have to be building, how you bring in a broad voices, lots of voices, let everyone have that space and have the dissension that is healthy. And it's hats off to the leadership, which has been thanked, but it's really hats off to the folks that have been doing the work on the PAC. And I can remember when we did the interviews, and we interviewed every single person who applied, and it was dozens. And your commitment that you stated in the interviews and has shown in the last year has just been incredible. And it is through wrestling with these issues, providing the feedback, and then going out into your own communities that you're a part of and having those conversations and talking about it, both the positive and the negative. And as humans, we won't ever be perfect when we are tackling issues, but what we can do is we can be respectful, we can listen, we can learn, we can be curious. That was a great word that Vice Mayor Bush used, and you have done that over and over. And I was reflecting that of all our committees, the PAC is the only one that, it's different than approving a public art project, right? Where there's more of a yes or a no. And so you're grappling with some really deep societal issues that can be grappled with in a lot of different ways. So thank you for your willingness and your courage to do that, and your commitment to keep doing that. And I'm proud of our community that we have the PAC done, led by excellent people, committed by excellent people who are willing to do the work. And I look forward to what comes out of this, because trust isn't, we've done a lot. You have done a lot in a year, but that trust has to continually be built on. So part of the challenge when I look forward to 2025, yes, you've had your learning. What I'm hopeful is that that learning goes deeper into the community. So when we're talking about voices, it just continues to get extended and people start to build that trust, the next person, the next person, the next person. So I know that you will all be up to tackling that task. So Councilmember Llorens-Gulati, I would invite your motion on this item.
I'll be delighted to accept the Police Advisory and Accountability Committee annual report. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Llorens-Gulati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Thank you all. Our next item, switching gears, is the fiscal year 2024-25 mid-year budget update and personnel changes. We'll give a moment for folks to switch out. Welcome, Director Navazio.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Kate, members of the council, as noted, this is, agenda item is the just presentation of the fiscal year 24-25 mid-year budget update. I'm going to just quickly summarize the information that's in a pretty meaty packet and then turn it over to questions. Let's see. A note that the report, a lot of the information in the report is strictly informational, providing an update on the revenue and expenditure results through the first half of the fiscal year. We'll touch briefly on projections, updated projections for the general fund in terms of where we expect to end the current fiscal year. The recommendation also includes a request for the council to approve mid-year supplemental budget appropriations that are listed in the report. And then there's also a recommendation for the council to approve a resolution that authorizes amendments to some of the salary schedules that are required for some of the personnel changes that we'll touch on briefly in the report. So just to quickly go through the numbers, through the first half of the year on an all funds basis, the city recorded revenues of $82.85 million. That's against an amended budget of $195.5 million, so about 42% of the revenues collected through the first half of the year. Attachment A of the report provides the detail that these charts are taken from, showing the revenues and expenditures by groups of different funds. It was noted at the beginning of the meeting that one area that staff is absolutely paying very close attention to is potential impacts of what's going on in the federal government related to not just prospective funding to fund future infrastructure projects, but also some of the grants and funding that we believe we have already secured that we're counting on to implement projects and support programs. That continues to be a fluid situation, but we will continue to monitor that as long with our kind of state and federal partners. On the expenditure side, through the first 6 months of the year, the city recorded expenditures of $91.4 million. We also have encumbered, and that's through purchase orders and contracts that have been committed, but money not yet out the door, an additional $31.5 million. So together, we've expenditures and commitments account for about 53% of the budget for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. These are, pretty high level summaries with some additional information provided in the report for the readers. On the general fund, the general fund revenues through the first 6 months of the fiscal year, sorry, it's obscured on my screen here with the setting, but we've recorded general fund revenues of, pardon. Yes, 43.8 million against the budget, adjusted budget of 103.79 million. So we've collected about 42% of the revenue within the general fund. What's noteworthy in the report is, I would say that most of our revenues seem to be tracking fairly consistent with our budget. However, the areas where we're seeing revenues in excess of the budget, tracking better than the budget, the top of the list is basically our interest earnings, which we noted is a positive for the fund, positive for our fund balance. But as we shared with the preview at the finance subcommittee, interest earnings is not the revenue source that you're going to, peg to plan for, sustainable funding augmentation. So it definitely helps the fund balance. We're a little bit, I won't say concerned, but less optimistic about some of the core revenue sources that we rely on, particularly the property tax and sales tax. We've come off a couple of years of some pretty significant growth, and there's some early signs that while we're tracking with the budget, historically those have exceeded the budget, and we've seen some fairly robust growth in those areas. And working with our revenue consultants, there's just signs across the board of things tempering just a little bit. So we're going to continue to use fairly conservative projections in our revenues going forward. And we'll cover that in a little bit more detail as we get into the development of next year's budget. On the expenditure side within the general fund, we've recorded expenditures of $55.6 million against an adjusted budget of 112.6, combined again with encumbrances, which are funding commitments that the city has entered into. We basically spent or committed 52.5% of the general fund budget. But again, the lion's share of that is really in contracts that have been executed that are going to last the whole year. So looking ahead at our projection for year end, generally looking favorable, but want to highlight a couple of notes on our general fund revenue projection. This is on page 3 of the staff report. Again, as noted, the revenues as they stand today, our projection is that we would be ending the year about $1.3 million to the good in terms of revenues. But again, about half of that is interest earnings. The other contributors there are some positive results in our business license tax and also in license and permits. That shows that's kind of a sign of the development activity that is coming to the city that helps generate some revenues, but there's also workload and service demands associated with processing those developments. And should these projections hold, again, that $1.3 million favorable revenue variance is positive, but it's less than what we've seen in past budgets in terms of our projections exceeding the budget. So I don't know if we're doing a more accurate budget or just the realities coming down to our conservative projections. Last thing I'll note on this slide is our expenditure projections through the end of this fiscal year within the general fund, largely through, again, personnel cost savings that comes largely from vacancies that we've had in the organization. We are projecting general fund expenditures to be about $1.5 million under budget. And the two things to note there is that's a lot less of a personnel cost savings that we've seen over the last couple of years. We note in the staff report, a couple of reasons for this. One is that we've actually been very, successful, aggressive in filling a number of vacancies, which is critically important. We've also built into this budget an assumption of about a 3.5% vacancy rate. So that savings is already kind of baked into the budget. And what we're seeing right now is about a 5% vacancy rate, which is well below, I think we've cited in the report, as high as 10 or 12% in last year. So this, expenditure variance is just the difference between getting closer to sort of normal vacancy rates without having sort of overshot that target in putting the budget together. The end result of these two projections is somewhere between $2.5 and $3 million of favorable, I guess, growth in our general fund balance. Again, that compares to $7, $8, $10 million of growth over the last couple of years, which is why we've been able, at least in recent time, to help grow the reserve, grow the fund balance. But this year's results are lining up much closer to the budget projections, albeit still on the favorable side, both revenues and expenditures. What's also noted on this slide is the point that when we adopted this year's budget, we also, council approved an update to our general fund reserve policy. And just to reiterate that when we get to the budget development process and bring that all forward this spring, we will continue for priorities for our general fund reserve. Number one is to maintain our now 15% reserve level, which we continue to believe is prudent for the city going forward. And any funds in excess of our reserve policy that this result may contribute to, in our policy, we've included language that prioritizes the use of that fund for the items listed, including unfunded liabilities, self-insurance reserve, our equipment replacement needs, deferred maintenance, and to the extent possible, limited for one-time use for priority projects supporting council's goals in your strategic plan. So goal is to continue to use one-time money for one-time purposes to the extent possible. I think I've covered some of the main items in the revenues and the expenditures. I just spoke through all of these slides. So I will note that the second part, the first really action item included in the report is a recommendation that the council approve selected budget amendments. They total $672,411. They are actually listed in more detail in attachment B of the staff report. I would note that these are all non-general fund supplemental budget appropriation requests, and they kind of fall into a couple of categories. Some is funding that has been secured by the city that was not known at the time of when we adopted the budget. We also have been successful similarly in obtaining some additional grant revenues, particularly in the area of public safety. We are needing to request an increase in the appropriation for the vehicle replacement fund due to some cost increases and costs associated with equipping some of the new vehicles that were previously purchased. Anyway, the list is 672,000 listed here by fund. The report also goes on to discuss a handful of mid-year personnel changes. I'll just speak very briefly to these. I guess the common thread across all of the personnel changes that are being recommended is they're part of the city's continuing effort to prioritize recruitment and retention. And I think well, I don't think it's pretty clear to some of us that the work that was done and the labor agreements that the city was able to reach with all its bargaining groups played a significant role in advancing recruitment and retention. As part of the mid-year budget update, there's been additional work looking at either specific job classifications that are being adjusted, in some cases a series of job classifications to better align with both the needs of the city and what is felt needed in order to recruit the qualified applicants. I think in the case of the library, there's proposals that really speak to a restructuring of the staffing complement for the library. The impact of all of those changes for the current fiscal year is relatively modest, I would say, noted in the fiscal impact under $100,000 and well within the ability of the impacted departments to absorb the cost because it's a partial year cost for the remainder of the fiscal year, and some costs won't actually be incurred until some of those positions are filled. At the city manager's direction, the kind of annualized fiscal impact of these changes that would necessarily need to built into next year's budget. The direction is that those costs are going to be absorbed within the existing departmental budget. So the goal here is not through making this recommendation, not get ahead of the budget process and start building additional costs into future budgets, but work with the departments to essentially absorb these costs because it's kind of a cost of doing business, and we're trying to realign our staff within the existing resources to fill the positions we need and deliver the services. So I'm just going to summarize again. The recommendation is to accept the 24-25 mid-year budget update and authorize the mid-year supplemental budget appropriations totaling $672,411. And then for the personnel changes, there's a resolution in attachment C of the report, which essentially authorizes amendments to the salary schedules to reflect the classification changes that are included in the report. There is a supplemental budget appropriation associated with one personnel change, and this was discussed with the council as part of the franchise fee agreement presentation that Corey and his team made. There is one net new FTE, which is the program analyst for the waste reduction program. That is going to be fully reimbursed through a reimbursement agreement with Marin Sanitary Services. But because it flows through the city budget, we have to include the funding for that position and the revenue to support it. With that, that's the report.
Thank you, Director Navazio. I'll see if there are any questions. Vice Mayor.
Just a couple of questions, one very high level, one down in the nitty gritty. I'll start with the high level. I think this probably goes to the city manager. I'm looking at attachment C, and what strikes me as an unusually long list of adjustment, a mid-year personnel changes. Does this reflect a broader strategic reordering? And if so, should we be expecting these more regularly, or is this a bit of a one-off and a catch-up?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a little bit of a one-off and a catch-up. I think to Paul's point about our recruitment and retention strategies, our classification system, it's kind of an old term, but our classification system, we're growing and evolving, and then the specific job descriptions and needs for certain functions are evolving with us. So when we say it's kind of catch up, a lot of the departments have been looking at, to Paul's point about the library, like how are they structured? How are the managers and supervisor overseeing as we grow and expand our services? So I wouldn't expect to see this amount of changes, particularly at mid-year on an ongoing basis. It is a little bit of a catch up to making sure we can hire at the right level and remaining competitive with our compensation. But this, I would say, is unusual, and we wouldn't expect to see this in the next fiscal year budget cycle or on an ongoing basis. It's not a trend, it's more of a catch up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, the detailed question, which I think is more for the director, on the transit occupancy tax that is shown on the revenues, table 7, yes. Am I looking at the wrong one? Well, the question is, there was some issues that arose regarding an additional increment of transit occupancy tax that was overseen by the county. Does this new number, the number in the current budget, reflect the resolution of that issue, or are you continuing to investigate and look into that other element?
Good question. Should have clarified it. This the budget and the results and the projections reflect solely the 10% transient occupancy tax that the city levies on, room charges and room nights, which is our hotel tax. There is a separate assessment on hotel nights. I believe it's 2% that is assessed at the county level for the Marin County Visitors Attraction Bureau. Number one, so that does not reflected in these numbers because that's not city revenue and city funds. And there are still discussions taking place to look at the efficacy of those dollars and how they're being spent.
Thank you, and I'll encourage you to pursue that investigation.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz, any questions? Any questions? Yeah, Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Director Navazio, for the report. And the math equation that showed up to me was the difference between the budgeted revenue and the budgeted expenditure for the general fund. There's a difference of negative 8.5 million. And I know we had approved that way back about 6 months ago, but can you, because it wasn't in the staff report, but can you share where that 8.5 came from and why we're okay with that? Because I recall, but I just want to make sure folks can hear it.
Great. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Definitely worth a mention. So that reflects basically entirely staff recommendation, the council's support of utilizing available fund balance for, again, one-time needs. Don't have it memorized but this is where we allocated an additional $1 million to the vehicle replacement fund, $1 million into our liability self-insurance fund. We committed, I think, $2 million to the capital fund to shore up other areas of the budget by taking advantage of some one-time funding, again, consistent with the priorities listed in the reserve policy. So when we discuss this also sort of internally in some of our budget discussions, I'd still say that the council, we approved a balanced budget where one-time, recurring expenditures are balanced with one-time revenues, and then using available reserves or savings account specifically for one-time needs is what shows the overall budget that has expenditures exceeding the revenues for the year.
Totally. It totally made sense. It just several times if a member of the public says, why are we okay with a negative 8.5 million difference between expenditure and revenue? And that's the reason. So thank you for sharing that.
And there's, I will remember, but when we bring back the next budget update and then the 25-26 budget, when you look at it over the forecast, you'll see where you're using one-time money and where the budget is hopefully structurally balanced over our planning horizon.
Definitely. No, I just want to make sure folks know that we have a balanced budget, even though it says negative 8.5, which is great. And then a question on the supplemental fiscal year 24-25 budget appropriations across the various funds, the non-general funds. Is this a pretty typical amount to, to 600K and change? Is that pretty typical for needing to respond to unanticipated needs?
Again, great question. I don't really have a super easy answer to that. I think, let me say there are three factors go into developing this list, and I think it's going to vary over time. One is just the unanticipated potential, like access to revenues or funding that we didn't anticipate during the budget. The other part of it, this is in some ways a partial list, but we identified sort of the urgent needs that couldn't wait until we get to the budget process because we actually had a lot more items come across our desk for consideration. And the goal here was really to try to limit it to the extent possible and only bring forward ones that are needed. But the flip side of that is as we work with the departments and get better at budgeting and better at anticipating and potentially work with the city manager and the council on what level of contingencies get built into the budget, there'll be less of a need to come to the council with these types of adjustments. And so it's a combination of factors, and how this list will behave going forward kind of depends on how we approach the budget at the front end.
That's great. And your answer actually answered my next question, which was going to be, how is that factoring into how we approach this in the future? And I appreciated that there are going to be both positive and negative perturbations as you look at across funds. And I like the notion of bringing up how do we better build in contingency to account for those unanticipated changes.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Scolari.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. The first one, I'm so excited about the new position for the waste management. And thank you, Marine Sanitary, for covering for that. So I guess my question is the continuity of the position. So I guess after we approve it, we'll go and hire for this position. So can you speak a little bit like to the community about what's the funding, what is included? Is it for a year funding? Is it, thank you.
We'll defer to Corey.
Hi, Mayor and Council, Sustainability Program Manager Corey Bidoff. This is one I'm very excited about, as I know you are as well.
Yes.
Long time coming. It's baked into the rates, now the customer rates, so it would need to be pulled out of the rates at a future time. So it's something that will go into the annual rate review, and it'll be treated like any other item. So it's until further note, it'll be in there unless you made a decision to change that. So.
Yeah, which is amazing news. So thank you so much.
Sure.
So that was one. My second one is around, I know that there is a restructuration around the library, which I think is great. I guess is, are you considering, so I'm thinking about the library specifically in the Alboro Center. And are you keeping in mind people that they are bilingual, they speak other languages?
That's our Library and Community Services Director.
Yeah, Library and Recreation Director, Catherine Kufa. Yes, that is definitely something in our job descriptions that we look for in staff is ability to speak community languages. Currently, all of our permanent staff at the Pickleweed Branch Library are bilingual, Spanish, English, and that's something we would look to continue.
Great. Okay, so those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite public comment on this item. If you're interested in sharing a few thoughts, you're invited but not required to say your name and what part of San Rafael you're from.
Hi, Monica Fong Gray. I am a business owner here in San Rafael. I just had a quick question, actually. This kind of relates to our next topic. For the sales and use tax, I know cannabis sales tax is included in that. Where is the special 2% tax located? Is that in supplemental taxes or is that?
We'll go ahead and answer your questions and I'll collect them all and then we'll have them.
Perfect. And then one other question. Was the budget of 2024-25 calculated with the 2% included for budgeting? That is all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions on this item?
Sorry, but my name is Sharna Deemer in the Montecito area. I can't help taking the opportunity to remind the council that one of the city's goals in this 2040 plan is to have a park in the Montecito neighborhood. So it's complicated and we've discussed this before, but since we're talking about budget and part of the issue is budget, I just want to remind you of your goals.
Thank you.
Alvatiri Gersel Park, demonstrate my ignorance here. Does the general fund include grants? And if so, what percentage of the general fund, represents those grants? Is it small? Okay, all right, that's it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any, we'll close the public comments and come back. There are some questions specific to cannabis, which we can probably answer top line because we have another agenda item on that topic. But I think it's a good question to see. So if you could answer that, and then also the general fund and the grants question that was just posed.
Yes, so the city tracks all of the tax revenue from the cannabis industry in a special revenue fund, and so it's not in the general fund. Again, this is subject to the next item on the agenda, but to, I think, answer the question specifically, the budget for this year, even though the tax operate is set on a calendar year basis, the budget assumed that the current tax rates as they currently stand today would remain in effect until the council chooses to do otherwise. And the cannabis rate for non-storefront dispensary deliveries is at 2% in the budget.
Thank you. Yep.
And then lastly, on grants, by and large, we do not record and track grant revenues and grant programs through the general fund. That's by definition the general tax revenue that the council has pretty general discretion on how to spend. And I'm not aware of too many grants that fall under that category. They all have a specific purpose and a restricted purpose. And I'll just note on that that as we refine our kind of budget framework, particularly as we transition to our new financial system starting next year, we are putting some effort in better being able to isolate the grant revenues individually and in aggregate, because we have some funds that are specifically for grants, and then we have grants that sort of flow through, like the gas tax fund, and flow through other funds, and sometimes it's a little challenge to really pull out the grant revenue. So we're looking at how to better set that up for reporting and transparency purposes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Vice Mayor.
A follow-up question, sort of in anticipation of our next item. I'm looking at Table 7 and the line for Measure G Cannabis Fund 216. And as I go across, I see it's 21% of the budget. So, and we would expect at the half-year market to be 50. So is it fair to conclude that the actual revenues are running substantially behind what anticipated, less than half?
Yeah, actually, I think what's going on there is just the timing of receipts. So even though, because they pay them, I believe, 4 times a year. And so we don't necessarily get the full 6 months by December 31st. And so there's a lag in, same with our regular sales tax.
Okay, so it's
a
not
lag of
fair
it.
to make drawing conclusions.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Not seeing any. Any comments? Folks, Vice Mayor, you want to make a couple comments on behalf of the council, and then
I will make the usual comment that this is a an excellent report that gives us a clear feedback on our budgeting process, and that it's improving. It's really great to see that our vacancy rates are down, so that kind of just our staffing costs are up, but they're running towards what we would want them to be, and that we are accurately forecasting our revenues. So things are coming together. This is exactly what we want to see at a mid-year report. I'm happy to receive it and approve it. With the additional allocations that need to be made, and the sort of one-off personnel changes that we're going to be making as well. So excellent report. I'm looking forward to approving it.
would you go ahead and make a motion?
I think we need to make a couple of them.
Yep, so they're 2 separate motions.
I will make the first one. I move that we accept the fiscal year 2024 mid-year budget update, presenting revenue and expenditure results through the second quarter of the current fiscal year through the accounting period ended December 31st, 2024, and authorize mid-year budget supplemental budget appropriations totaling $672,411 across selected funds.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Yan Scolati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Motion on the second item, please.
And I'll roll into the next one. I move that we adopt the resolution authorizing amendments to salary schedules to reflect fiscal year 2024-25 mid-year personnel changes and appropriating funding for a new position supporting the sustainability division.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Yenenskilati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Director Navazio. The last item on our business agenda this evening is extending cannabis business tax rate temporary reduction. As Director Hinkle is not moving. I see Assistant Director Minor is coming down. Welcome. Wait, nope, do that. Wait, do it again. Yep, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, Greg Miner with Community and Economic Development Department. Before you this evening is a proposed resolution to extend the current tax rate for cannabis delivery businesses of 2% of annual gross receipts for another 2-year period of January of 2025 to the end of December 2026. I'm going to provide a bit of background on how staff arrived at this recommendation and then be available for any questions that you should have. So following the passage of Proposition 64 in November 2016 by California voters here in San Rafael, as the council members know better than I, voters approved Measure G in the summer of 2018. And I want to highlight a couple things about Measure G. So first and foremost, Measure G authorized the city of San Rafael to levy a special business tax on licensed cannabis businesses of up to 8% of their annual gross receipts. It also authorized the city council to establish different tax rates for different cannabis businesses of up to 8% of their annual gross receipts, provided those tax rates were set for a minimum of a 2-year period. It also established the initial tax rates for San Rafael's cannabis businesses of 4% for delivery services, 3% for manufacturers, and 1% for testing laboratories and distributors. And lastly, I would add that Measure G stated that the special cannabis tax revenues would go towards maintaining and enhancing City of San Rafael services. So following the 2018 and the initial years of adult use cannabis legalization, operators both at the local and the state level expressed concern about being overly taxed. And there were different efforts at tax reform, starting with at the state level in June of 2022. The state legislature passed AB 195, which eliminated a cultivation tax that had previously existed and imposed a 15% state excise tax on the purchasers of cannabis products, which is implemented by retailers like delivery services. Notably, AB 195 also included a provision that by July 1st of this year, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, or CDTFA, is required by law to adjust the excise tax that retailers impose up to 19% if there's a need to increase it to generate the same amount of tax revenue that the state of California was receiving prior to the elimination of the cultivation tax. So unless the state legislature makes that adjustment, it's likely there'll be an increase in taxes at the state level. Although I'll note San Francisco Assembly Member Matt Haney has proposed eliminating that line item. And I know there's advocacy efforts at the state level to rescind or amend that language. And then back at the local level in November of 2022, as the council members, again, know better than I, the city council here adopted a resolution to lower the tax rate for San Rafael's delivery operators from 4% to 2% of their gross receipts for a 2-year period of 2023 and calendar years of 2023 and 2024. The rationale behind that reduction were the numerous challenges that the cannabis operators face in the regulated marketplace, because even though at the local and state level, cannabis may be lawful, because it's still a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law, cannabis operators aren't able to avail themselves of some of the resources that regular businesses have, such as grants and loans from the Small Business Administration, access to banking, deducting business taxes because of a line item under IRS Tax Code 280E. And then delivery operators are responsible for implementing that excise tax. So those were the different reasons that the council adopted that tax reduction, in addition to competition from the unregulated marketplace, which is different from, say, a traditional business that didn't have an existing unregulated marketplace before it was established. So staff's recommendation is to extend the 2% reduced tax rate for delivery operators for another 2-year period from January 1st of this year to December 31st of 2026. This approach balances the city's support of the cannabis industry with the direction of San Rafael voters who approved Measure G by over 80%. If the city council were to take no action, the default 4% tax rate would be in place for delivery operators. So this proposal helps reduce the tax burden for delivery operators while still ensuring that the city receives approximately $200,000 in annual tax revenues that go into the general fund, which is the most flexible fund for funding city services. Currently, those revenues go towards staff costs in the community and economic development, police, and finance departments. Finally, as it was discussed on the last item, this proposal has no fiscal impact above and beyond what was already anticipated in the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. So happy to answer any questions that council members may have, and thank you.
Thank you, Gray. Question, Councilmember Kurtz, go ahead.
Hopefully just a quick question on the regional tax rates. I was actually looking for sort of our closest neighbors. So Nevada's not listed, and it's because I'm thinking from a consumer perspective, who would they go to? Or if you're shopping around. And so I was wondering if you have Nevada.
Unfortunately, I don't at this moment, but I'm happy to research it and come.
No problem. Sorry, I caught you off guard on that one. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Craig, for the staff report and for your presentation. Can you walk through what it would look like if the council were to entertain going to a 0 or a 1% tax? What would be the implications?
So procedurally, I defer to the city attorney's office, but I think that's an option for the city council to consider, provided it was for a minimum of a 2-year period. But in terms of the impacts, it'd be less general purpose fund tax revenues, and depending on whether you reduce it by 1% or 2%, the fiscal impact section cites essentially the impact of a reduction, including the reduction that's being proposed of the 4% to a 2% rate. And then I would defer to the city manager, but if the city were to continue carrying the same positions and staff costs and the council reduced the tax rate beyond what staff was proposing, the city would have to identify an alternative source of funds for those staff costs.
Thank you.
Councilmember Urens-Galati.
Yes, thank you. So mine is actually a follow-up from that one, so thank you for asking that question. So I see that part of the revenue covers the SAFE team, and in the previous item, you might not know this, but there was a mention that the city is applying for some grants to cover the SAFE team. So is that in addition to what's already covered, or will that be like, how much can we replace it with something else?
Director Navazio of Finance, just to try to shed some light on that. So the budget does contemplate a contribution from the cannabis tax revenues to support the SAFE team. However, again, as the council is aware, Christine can help on this, when the pilot program for the SAFE team was established, there's essentially kind of a waterfall of funding that is used. Near the top of that list is opioid settlement fundings that are continuing to come in and will support that. So we have not fully utilized the amount that we budget each year from the cannabis tax for the SAFE team. It's unlikely that we will need to use it because of the availability, at least in the short term, of ongoing opioid settlement funds. And then I think the grant funds are critically important in terms of long-term sustainability beyond the pilot program. if that helps.
If I could just add a clarification, I think the challenge that we have with funding the SAFE team and the cost of it, one, we want to expand it. Two, typically grants are one time and the opioid settlements are great, but can't rely on them from ongoing revenues and sustainability of the program. So it is a little bit of a patchwork with hopes that we can kind of fully fund the model that we have now and expand it. So our goal is to have a sustainable ongoing revenue source that we can rely on and have it built into city services, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. So on the comparison of the regional tax rates, I wasn't sure which delivery would that fall into distribution because you have different categories. So if you could just clarify.
Yeah, sure. Cannabis regulation is oftentimes unnecessarily complicated. A delivery service is under the bucket of retailer.
Oh, it is.
The state of California has just divided retailer into two categories. One is storefront, like a dispensary, and the other is a non-storefront, which is a delivery service.
So this retail that's listed here is still the combined bucket.
Yeah, retailer is a delivery service is a form of retailer. So if you were comparing tax rates from jurisdiction, you would look at other jurisdictions' retail tax rates.
Okay, so for the most part, 3% to 7%. Okay. And then this other question, I don't might be for our Assistant City Attorney. So you had mentioned, Greg, in your presentation about the Measure G language. And on that ballot language, and I actually went to look it up as well, I'm curious, one, about the legality. We have already received an email requesting 0%. We might hear similar testimony about that. But from a legal standpoint, given the ballot language, could the council even have that ability to go to zero when the ballot very clearly said the tax, you were going to get this by doing this? So both the legality and the other part is the spirit of the ballot measure. So I don't know if do you understand those two different parts that I'm talking about? Okay.
So I have not had an opportunity to look at the ballot language, but
Okay.
the municipal code, which is where the tax is codified, only sets a maximum rate. It does not set a minimum rate. So I can't opine to the ballot language because I haven't had the opportunity to look at that.
Okay. Well, basically not being a lawyer, but a ballot, we're all voters here. So, and the ballot language is a tax rate on the cannabis industry to have these services provided to the community. So maybe it's both. It seems like the codified is what we're acting on, and the ballot, there might be more the spirit answering the spirit of the measure, or how a average person might interpret the ballot language to what it meant.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the ballot language is for the voters, and so would indicate what the council had intended to do with the money.
Yeah, and that's pretty much said. Okay, thank you. So there might be additional questions that arise from public comment or public comments. I'll open it up. You're welcome to provide it. And you can talk fast. You're 2 minutes.
I will.
Hello again. My name is Monica Gray Fong. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and to have this important measure. I know I already sent an email in earlier, but I'm just going to reiterate my email. Thank you again. I come before you as a business operator, as someone deeply invested in the future of our city, and as a member of the community that is trying desperately to survive under an extraordinary burden. Today, I speak to you about the urgent need to reduce the local cannabis tax in San Rafael from 2% to 0%, which is a hard ask after I just saw the budget and the 2% being included. This is not an ask that I make lightly, nor is it one born out of convenience or comfort. It is born out of necessity and a plea for survival, because if we are not in business, you will not have those revenues anymore. Many of us have already witnessed the toll this industry taxation and regulation has taken. We've seen our colleagues, our friends, and our neighbors, businesses that once proudly operated in San Rafael, close their doors under immense weight on these financial pressures. They were manufacturers who supplied jobs, contributed to our local economy, and believed in the potential of this industry. And now they're gone. But if something doesn't change, their story will also become ours. Starting this July, as Greg mentioned earlier, good to see you, Greg, 15 to 19% of gross receipts will be increased for the state excise tax, and that's most likely to go through. This alone will deal a devastating blow. At the same time, federal relief remains out of far reach. Rescheduling, I am on the board of the National Cannabis Industry Association. The rescheduling measure has been pushed out, which means that we are still subject to 280E of the tax code, preventing us from deducting even the most basic business expenses. On top of this, sales are dropping, which is probably why we are not meeting the budget. On top of this, we have to remain compliant, pay our business licenses. Insurance costs have skyrocketed, driven by the increase of fire risk in our region. And yet we are all
Monica, if you could wrap up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go
Yes.
ahead, just wrap up.
I already have this in an email, but thank you for your time and consideration on reducing the tax to 0% if possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor Kate, City Council. I'm Narit Rafael. I'm the co-founder of ONA. This year will be 10 years of ONA's anniversary, and we're very scared we're going to close our doors. It's a very trying time right now. If you read any article on the SF Gate or anywhere really, it's talking about how awful things are. I'm a little upset tonight because I've been emailing you guys for over a year about not just keeping the tax rate at 2%, but reducing it, and it seems like that's not a conversation nor something that went into the budget. Like you asked earlier, Novato has no tax on cannabis, Petaluma has no tax on cannabis, and San Francisco has no tax on cannabis. So that's everywhere we're surrounded by. My sales are dropping every single day. And I think my own family is no longer buying from the family business because they can't afford to. They're going elsewhere, and it's a very harsh reality. I second everything Monica says, from how hard our business is to what you guys are doing. We're beyond grateful for everything San Rafael has done to keep us alive thus far. And I think we're just asking for that more survival from you guys. Like, just back us up, help us through this. If you can reduce it to 0, we would be celebrating. If it's 5, another 50%, I would celebrate. If it's 1%, I would celebrate. Any help will be tremendous for us. I don't know how else to beg and plead for that from us. There's also advocacy groups pushing for the state to not do what they're planning on doing in July. I will tell you, if that happens, it's going to be a death sentence for us. And sadly, I think you guys can see the cannabis licenses are remaining really to Monica and I. There's maybe one other delivery, and Sweet Relief. But other than that, there's nobody left. So when you look at that licensing thing from San Rafael, they're not here anymore, and we want to stay. So we love you and appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Be real brief here. Yeah, it breaks my heart to hear this. I also agree with them and support them, and we have to reduce this cost. It's, obviously thinking about this city and where we live and how costly things are, and this is health related, right? We all have health, and health is wealth, that kind of thing. So, I mean, it's totally inaccessible financially, right? So from a purchaser perspective, so anything you can do to reduce it so people can have their dignity as they get older and deal with their challenges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Albateri Gersel Park. It sounds like a bunch of bullshit, really. 2% and now your business is going to be profitable. It doesn't make any sense. I don't see how that is going to make you any more profitable, especially when there's a decrease in interest in buying marijuana, and it's not because of the cost, as well as the expense that they may have for other things. Marijuana is not paying the rent, it's not buying food, it's not doing any of the necessities. It's a discretionary thing for most people. I understand some people take it for medication, and that's a whole different issue. That's a medical marijuana. And I don't think we're talking about recreational marijuana here. And giving up $200,000 to the city or $100,000, it just financially just make any sense. If anything, let them go out of business. It's not your job to make sure they're profitable, frankly. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Not seeing anyone, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. And it was noted in the staff report, this was talked about at the Economic Subcommittee in December as well. Thank you, Monica, Nareed, and others for coming to that conversation. So there was some discussion that had taken place prior to this discussion on the dais. So Vice Mayor, so it's going to be a discussion. Why don't you tell us what you're thinking about?
I'm thinking about the ballot measure and the voters and I'm thinking about all the work we put in on this topic over the years. And I'm thinking about the relatively modest sum that we're getting in return for all that work. And I think this is as low as we can go. The state is levying a 15% tax. 100% support you in trying to get that changed. If it's been described that it's very likely that's going to go up by 4%, so that's going to swamp anything that we do. I think remaining true to our voters when they considered this measure, which I think received one of the highest approval ratings ever of any vote. I think we've taken it down as low as we can go, and we should adopt the staff recommendation. One question to the Economic Development Committee: do you have a recommendation as well, or do you support the staff's recommendation?
I think we're looking forward to seeing what everyone on the dais was going to say for all the reasons. It's well, there are issues that have been brought forward, but I will turn to Councilmember Hill, and then I'll be happy to weigh in.
Yeah, I think the factors here are challenging to work through, but I want to enumerate some of them. So I do think that Greg enumerated them very well about what the cannabis industry generally is facing. At the federal level, there's the inability to itemize, the inability to bank affordably, the levies, the excise taxes that are, as well as the sales and use tax that are being levied at the state level are high. The unregulated industry that they're up against, my sense is that enforcement is not working very well. It does seem that it's working that direction. On the flip, I'll borrow a comment from Al Viteri, who shared it earlier, which is for a lot of folks, this is a recreational activity, and there's also a medical side to it as well. I also think that we have to consider, and it was not brought up in the staff report, but that if we do a reduction, there are other licensees that would may want similar relief. And I think that opens others. I think that there has been also from other licensees and other businesses in the community, an acceptance of that we moved forward with the reduction. So all this is to say, I'm still grappling with exactly what to do here, because I know that we have a budget that we have to maintain. To your points, the voters have an expectation of what the yield was supposed to be for our community. And even just to run the program itself, not even beyond just what it's going to do for the budget, it does cost money for us to regulate the Measure G as well. So I'm still grappling with it, but I'd like to hear other voices as well.
Councilmember Lorenz-Gulati, your thoughts?
So I'm thinking about the legality. So I would really love to get the answer exactly of what the voters did, and how can we make this decision based on that. I do believe that having a revenue of $225,000 versus having a revenue of zero because they go out of business. I'd rather take the, having them in business. And I do believe that they do a community service. I like it, the fact that it's regulated. So I don't know that the answer is to go to zero versus maybe 1%, or I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but I will be, if we can check on the legality, I will be, inclined to go a little bit lower just to support them.
Okay. Councilmember Kurtz, your thoughts?
I think when we look at it, after following the conversation on where we are in our mid-year budget, when we talk about $196 million revenue budget that we have, this represents 0.1%, right? It's a very, very small amount. And I think within our budget, that amount is there. So I'm thinking about that sure, revenue is nice, but I mean, in our big picture of the budget, I'm not sure taxing this industry that's really, these businesses, small number of businesses trying to stay alive, if it's really helping us, if that would be what's driving us to do the 2%. Against the legality of the measure, absolutely, we need to maintain what's in that. But I'm not sure that this tax really serves that purpose. These businesses are trying to operate in a white market that is fully driven by a black market. And I don't know how else we can support. We try to support lots of our businesses and organizations. I don't believe we have this type of tax on any other business. Right? I was trying to think if there was anything else, and I understand, I mean, it's essentially a new business. And the state's trying to figure it out, federal's trying to figure it out. I'm not sure we need to get into the business of trying to figure it out. So to me, this 2%, I don't think it's necessarily going to make or break us in the work that we need to do. And I'd be inclined to either do 0, or if we need to do 1, we do 1.
Well, 2 cents. So to be clear, it would have been 4% if it wasn't brought forward, because that is the trigger. So the ordinance is actually for 4%. So staff, even though we're talking about reducing, the fact is staff is already recommending to keep it that reduction. The challenge that I'm hearing, and it's so interesting hearing what both public commentary and as well as what everyone's talking about up here, and that is the tax rates at the state level are so huge that are incremental, and it's infuriating that as a local business, local city, we are bearing the brunt of I'll just say it, poor state regulation. And so we're trying to fix it, and we have very, very tiny, tiny tools. And I know at the December meeting, we actually got quite into the details about what would happen in July, and then could we do this if this happens then? And then what we realize is trying to hinge our decision based on what the state's going to do is a really fraught deal in any case. I would be interested in discussing a 1%. I don't support a 0%, regardless of the legality, and I know they're looking at it. The spirit of that measure, if we were to go out and ask people and they looked at the ballot measure, the spirit of that measure was our citizens voted to have cannabis industry come into our community because there was a real benefit dollar-wise. That number's gone up and down as we've talked about, but there was a benefit. That was the ask of our community. So to me, the legal part is interesting, but the spirit, to me, it was not a 0%. And I guess the part that gives us all pause, and I heard it in all of our comments, is we go to 1%, and if the state jacks it up 4% in 4 months, then, game over, unfortunately, and those are using your words, and I say it with a lot of seriousness, because both of you have been advocates for the industry, and I can remember back in 2018 when this was approved in this chamber, and the chambers was full of young business entrepreneurs, women, men, women of color, men of color. Like, it was a really a different face on our business community, which we are excited about. And it really wasn't about the money, although the money was great. It was also about the type of industry that we were legally enabling here. I'm interested, and this is, so I can't say what the number is, but I do have a question for Greg based on what we heard of the commentary about Novato having a 0%. We have a delivery rate. I would want, if they are San Rafael customers purchasing San Rafael products, is there a mechanism to ensure that San Rafael businesses are used in that? Or is it the kind of underbelly of it all that people are coming from San Francisco? Because how would you even enforce that? Or Novato outside of our city? Because I do remember talking about that in 2018 a lot. And the mayor at the time wanted people to have painted vans. We're like, no, that won't work. But the sentiment was a good one. Yes, the sentiment was a good one.
Can you clarify, the question is about painted vans, or the
No,
question is about?
not about painted.
So what, if a delivery business comes into San Rafael, do we get a portion of the tax
Yeah,
revenue?
I mean, how do we, what's the mechanism?
I think how is probably a great question for us to explore. Should we? Yes, if there's a business transaction taking place within our jurisdiction, and they literally come to you. So there's a way to do enforcement operations if you wanted to catch them in the act, I imagine. With respect to Novato, we actually have a new colleague in our department that just came from Novato and handled cannabis regulation there, I believe. And she shared that it sounds like they're structured differently with a community benefit agreement component, but that they require somewhere around 3.5% of gross receipts for delivery operators, as far as I understand. But we're happy to look into more the enforcement angle to ensure that San Rafael is getting its share of tax revenue from delivery operators coming into San Rafael.
Well, we don't want we don't want other delivery operators coming in. We want to support our local businesses. I mean, that's.
There may be a challenge in that with that, and that in state law, it allows delivery to any private address in California.
Got it.
And we can't prohibit folks from coming within our borders.
Okay. The other part of this conversation, again, going back to the December conversation that Councilmember Hill was at, was really about the advocacy at the state level. And again, it's a little bit pushing a boulder up the hill, but I do think that having that ongoing advocacy is important. I don't know if you see avenues there, or you mentioned, I think a supervisor in San Francisco, but the rates, yeah. So I don't know if you have any insight on that.
I think there's both industry, there's industry and efforts to avoid a tax increase, and then
Got it.
there's legislators like the Assembly Member Matt Haney from San Francisco, who I think used to be a supervisor and now is a state Assembly Member, who's proposed language to avoid an increase to the state excise rate. There may be some challenge that I think is probably low-hanging fruit. The challenge might be if there's tax rates that were baked into the proposition that California voters approved when they approved Prop 64. And then that's where there's some tension at the state level, because I believe some of the Prop 64 explicitly identified who would receive some of the tax revenues. So for every operator that wants lower tax rates, there's constituents or special interests that want the tax rates to remain high because they get funding from that. So that's where there's some push and pull at the state level.
And if I recall, again, at the December meeting, part of what came up as well was that the bigger cities in California, the Los Angeles of the world, the San Diego, San Francisco's, because they have bigger operators, they can absorb the tax rates in a way that smaller communities can't. So the pressure on the state legislators is to actually appease the bigger cities versus the local cities where we don't have as much impact on the decisions they're making. Yeah, Vice Mayor, comment.
I think I hear an emerging consensus that we will do what we can, which may not be much, in the persuasive arena to get the state to take a more reasonable approach to their taxing level. And that at the moment, we will do what we can here and reduce our tax rate, cut it in half again from 2 to 1%. And I'm ready to move that we do that.
City Manager or Assistant, City Attorney, is there a language around that? Knowing that the staff report and the resolution before us is worded differently?
Yes, there would be two small modifications to the resolution that's in your packet. If you wanted to lower the tax rate to 1%. In the last recital in the resolution, it would read, City Council finds lowering the gross receipts tax rate to 1%. And then in the resolve part, 2% would be changed to 1%. So my recommendation is for, if somebody wants to make this motion, is to simply move staff's recommendation with the following modifications as I just outlined above.
I move staff's recommendation with the following with the modifications as outlined by the Assistant City Attorney.
Second. I didn't know if there was any other comments before we go forward for the vote. Were there any other comments? We have had a discussion. Councilmember Hill and then Councilmember Aaron-Scolati.
Yeah, I mean, final comment, and I'm glad the motion was already made. We will have to make it again. But I think that this is the right move to send the right message. This is and just to be super clear, I think this is a very narrow intervention for a very specific reason, that the state and federal policy is not consistent with where things should be for the legal industry of cannabis retail here in San Rafael.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Aaron-Scolati.
I echo that. And just clarification, this rate will be in place until December 31st of 2026.
Yes, just 2 years.
2 years, great. Yes. Yes.
Did you have any other comments, or you are all in on the motion? Okay. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll. There's been a motion and a second. And did you make the motion with the aforementioned changes?
I did.
Okay, just making sure.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Eden-Scolati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye, that motion carries 5-0. Thank you. I wanted to say something else, but I think we heard enough. Okay. Before we adjourn the meeting, open time for public expression. This is any comments from the public on any item that was not on tonight's agenda, and we had the whole gamut tonight. But we're always welcome to hear anything else.
Just a quick thank you. I know we just said that, but
your guys' support really is just keeping us going, and it's really grateful to be a San Rafael grown girl and have you guys behind us. Thank you. Truly.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Not seeing any. This meeting is adjourned.